All right, let's settle in. We're going to wrap ourselves up, at least in our minds, and travel deep into the cold, dark, and impossibly damp winters of medieval Scotland. And I'll give you a spoiler right now, you probably wouldn't make it through this. Not without chilblains, a chest full of peat smoke, and a steady diet of boiled barley that might, or might not, come with a side of rat. Does that still sound like a relaxing escape? Perfect. So before you get too comfortable, please take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. There's really no pressure. Also, I'd love it if you drop your city and the time in the comments below, since I'm always curious to know where and when you're listening. Now go ahead and dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself standing in the vast emptiness of a frozen moor. It is bleak. The sky is a smothered gray that never truly becomes daylight, just sort of hovers in a space between fog and twilight. It's as if even the sun can't be bothered to make an appearance here. A steady, nameless wind is blowing from somewhere, whipping right through your cloak, if you're fortunate enough to even have one, and biting through every layer of wool like it's made of butter. It is so cold, the kind of cold that doesn't just sting your skin. It's a cold that settles deep down into your bones, into your thoughts, and right into your soul. Honestly, this is just a normal day. Welcome to winter in medieval Scotland. We're somewhere around the 1300s, give or take. Dates aren't very precise because calendars weren't exactly pinned to the wall of every little cottage. Time here is more of a feeling, you know, like the sheep look a bit frostier than they did yesterday, so it must be late November. You're part of a tiny rural village, tucked away somewhere in a windswept glen. Your primary goal for the next several months is incredibly simple: don't die. That's pretty much it. There are no winter sports to enjoy, no festive Christmas markets to browse, no emergency heating to turn on, and no emergency anything, really. The land itself is raw and completely untamed. The highlands in winter are especially brutal, with miles of icy peat bogs and frost-locked hills where absolutely nothing grows and almost nothing moves, except for that wind. That wind is a constant presence. It whistles and shrieks through every single crack in your home. It finds all the weak spots in your clothing, and it makes your teeth ache even when your mouth is clamped shut. Your house, if you can even call it that, is a low, smoke-filled, turf-roofed hut built from stones you found lying around and slapped together with a kind of prehistoric Play-Doh made of clay, dung, and whatever else would hold it all together. The walls are thick, that's true, but the concept of insulation doesn't really exist yet. The wind still manages to get in. The damp always gets in. And the roof, which is cleverly thatched with straw, has a tendency to drip a little whenever the snow melts, which it almost never does before March. Every now and then, a rat will rustle around in the rafters, and someone will swear it's the ghost of a cousin who died during the last winter. This is meant as a joke, but only about half of it is funny. You try your best to warm up beside the fire, but the smoke doesn't rise neatly up through a chimney, because there is no chimney. It just sort of hangs there under the roof, swirling around the room, looking for someone to slowly choke. Congratulations! You've just inhaled your yearly dose of lung-blackening soot. The fire itself is burning peat. There's no wood to be found here. Trees are incredibly rare, even considered sacred, and most of them were chopped down centuries ago anyway. Peat is what you have. It's dug out of the nearby bogs, left to dry for months, and then burned in pungent, slow smoldering fires. It has a damp, earthy smell, like ancient moss going through a midlife crisis. But it does provide heat. Sort of, and in this world, sort of is more than enough. Outside, the ground has frozen completely solid. The mud that squelched under your feet during the summer is now as hard as rock and laced with treacherous ice. Your boots, if you're lucky enough to have boots, don't help much. They're stiff and cracked, held together by nothing more than hope and a bit of animal sinew. And your toes lost all feeling about a week ago. You don't mention it to anyone. Everyone is in the same frostbitten boat. And to be honest, frostbite isn't even the worst thing you could get. The worst thing is the hunger, a real bone-rattling, sleep-shattering hunger, because winter doesn't care one bit about how well your harvest went. It will outlast your food stores if it feels like it. Maybe your community managed to salt enough fish. Maybe someone was lucky enough to bag a deer in the late autumn. Maybe the grain bins weren't completely eaten through by mice, but that's probably not the case. You're already starting to eye the sheep a little more thoughtfully than you probably should. Not as providers of wool, but as potential ingredients for a stew. Historically, the winters in Scotland weren't just cold. They were long, with days that offered barely any sunlight. The nights dragged on, and the only entertainment was talking, praying, and listening for the sound of wolves. Yes, wolves. They were still very much a thing back then. Sometimes they would venture closer during the winter, just as hungry and desperate as everyone else. And let's just say that the wooden doors on your huts didn't exactly come with deadbolts. You wrap your hands around a clay mug filled with something warm. It's probably a weak ale. The water isn't safe to drink, even if it's frozen. Parasites don't take the season off, so even the children drink beer too. Don't get too excited. It's incredibly weak, barely alcoholic at all, and it's mostly there just to keep you from getting dysentery. Fun times, right? You listen as someone by the fire begins to tell a story. It's an old one about a man who tried to leave the village during a snowstorm and came back with a wild look in his eye and with fewer family members than when he left. Nobody asks any questions. The children pretend they aren't listening, but their wide, staring eyes tell a different story. That's the thing about this place. Survival here isn't just a physical battle. It's a psychological one. Every winter seems to strip a little more away from you. Your health, your hope, maybe even your memory of what warmth feels like. You don't count the days, you simply endure them. You wait for a thaw that feels more like a distant rumor than any kind of guarantee. And yet people did manage to survive. Barely somehow, through cooperation, faith, and a whole lot of stubbornness. There are debates now about just how cold it really got back then. Some historians say the Little Ice Age hadn't quite hit its full swing yet. Others argue that regional microclimates made things even worse. But no matter which historian you choose to side with, one thing is abundantly clear. Medieval Scottish winters were no joke, and neither is the chill you're feeling right now. Go ahead, tuck that blanket a little tighter around your shoulders. We're just getting started. You wake up the next morning and for a brief second you think you've gone blind. Everything is gray, a gray sky, the gray mist of your own breath in front of your face, a gray layer of frost clinging to the inside of your walls. And then it hits you, no, you're not blind. It's just winter again. The sun technically rose an hour ago, but you'd have to squint really hard through the mist and the low cloud cover to prove it. Daylight here isn't bright. It's more like a suggestion of light. There's no alarm clock to wake you, but the sounds of movement around you are enough. The rustle of rough wool, the scraping of a pot, the groan of someone forcing on a pair of cold boots, all of it tells you it's time to start another day of trying not to freeze, starve, or slip on the ice and crack your skull. So you push yourself to your feet, and your joints crack like a thawing tree branch. It's another perfect morning in medieval Scotland. You step outside into the sharp, biting air and immediately regret your decision. Your nose protests, your eyes begin to water. The air is so cold it has a metallic taste, like you're biting down on a spoon. Your breath curls from your mouth in ghostly white puffs. The only splash of color in the entire landscape comes from a single patch of red lichen clinging stubbornly to the side of a rock. It's the kind of landscape that doesn't look like it wants people to live in it, but somehow they do. And to make things either better or worse, time is a very fluid concept in your village. There are no printed calendars, no clocks ticking gently on the mantles. You measure the passage of days by the stars, by the condition of the sheep's wool, by how much your joints are aching. Some families keep simple notched sticks, carving a new groove each day like prisoners marking time in a cell. Others have to rely on oral memory, which often leads to arguments about whether it's Tuesday or the feast day of some long-forgotten saint who probably died from the cold. This is where all the old traditions start to creep back in. You gather around a fire with the others as someone mutters about the length of the shadows and how the ravens were flying lower yesterday. A storm is coming, says a voice from the corner. There's no science here, just pure instinct and centuries of careful observation. This is a world that was built on watching for patterns. Nature isn't just scenery. It's the village's clock, its calendar, and its warning system, all rolled into one. Some early versions of calendars do exist, though. If you were to walk several miles to a certain outcrop of standing stones, a place the elders speak of as if it's sacred, you would find prehistoric stone circles aligned with the solstices. One of them, maybe it's the stones of Callanish or something eerily similar, catches the low winter sun just right on the shortest day of the year. It serves as a reminder that your ancestors, as ancient as they were watching the sky too. They had to. Missing the turning point of winter meant missing the planting time later on. And if you miss the planting time, you miss the eating time. And if you miss the eating time, you die. But all of that comes later. Right now, your only job is to get through this winter without starting to count the number of ribs showing on your neighbor's chest, because food scarcity does strange things to people. And speaking of the sky, it's worth mentioning that what little daylight you do get doesn't do much for you. On the shortest days of December and January, you're lucky to get 6 hours of murky twilight. That's assuming the clouds even part long enough to let the pale sun through. Most of the time, though, the sky is just a low-hanging sponge, dripping icy mist on everything. It never fully rains. It just sort of leaks constantly. Even snow is a sometimes treat. More often than not, it's just slush, wet, heavy, and cold in all the wrong ways. When the snow does finally fall, it's beautiful in that eerie, too quiet way that makes you worry that something is lurking just behind it. Your footfalls are muffled. The sheep don't bleat as much. Even the wind seems to die down a little as if it's waiting for something. You don't trust the snow. It hides things like puddles of ice, animal tracks, and pitfalls that lead into frozen streams. It is nature's softest weapon. Still, some of your neighbors try to see the season through the lens of old beliefs. Winter, they'll say, is the time when the world sleeps. The trees sleep. The soil sleeps. The bears, well, there used to be bears, they sleep. But people don't get to sleep. People have to chop wood, drag water, try not to catch pneumonia, and hope they stored enough oats to last them until April. There's also a lingering belief that winter is when the veil between worlds is at its thinnest. You might have heard that one mentioned around Samhain, when October ends and the nights stretch out longer than your patience. It's the time of spirits, the time of old gods and even older fears. People whisper about shape changers, about the bean-nigh who washes the clothes of the dead in frozen streams, and about the Cailleach, Scotland's old winter goddess, stomping across the mountains with frost in her hair. She supposedly controls winter itself, carving the landscape with her staff and deciding when spring will finally arrive. Spoiler alert, she's not in any kind of a rush, but don't laugh too hard at all the folklore. When everything around you is either dying or sleeping and your own body aches from the cold, it makes a weird kind of sense to believe in forces you can't see. In a way, it actually helps. It gives winter a name, a face. Something you can curse at when the thatch on your roof collapses under the weight of ice or the cow doesn't make it through the night. And here's something curious. Some of the early Gaelic poems actually celebrate winter, sort of. They talk about the fierce joy of surviving, of pushing through against all the odds. It's not a cozy feeling. It's not romantic. It's a raw, desperate kind of pride. Like, the wind tried to kill me again, but I'm still here. That's the vibe. Debates among scholars today continue about how much scientific understanding medieval Scots really had of their climate. There is no consensus. Some argue that the coastal communities understood the influence of ocean currents and tides more than we give them credit for. Others believe that most people just survived on a day-to-day basis. No theory was required. What is clear is that observation was everything. You either paid attention or you paid the price. Back in your village, someone lights another peat brick, and everyone scoots a little bit closer to the fire pit. There's no talking for a while, just the sound of the wind outside and the occasional cough. A wet, rattling sound that's likely the start of something no one wants to name. A child stirs in the corner, wrapped in 2 thin wool blankets, already pink with cold even under all the layers. His mother pulls him closer, muttering something in Gaelic under her breath. It might be a prayer or maybe a curse. You don't ask. Instead, you stretch your legs and just stare into the flames. They flicker low, guttering as the damp peat hisses. The smell is earthy and thick, clinging to your hair, your clothes, your thoughts. You'll carry that smell with you everywhere long after the fire has gone out. And outside, the cold deepens. You duck back into the croft just as the wind kicks up again, slamming into the walls with that low, hollow sound that makes everything inside shiver, including your bones. You're grateful for any kind of shelter, even if this particular one is the architectural equivalent of a damp sock. It's not much, but it's better than sleeping outside with the crows, right? Though depending on how last night went, you can't be entirely sure that someone didn't end up doing exactly that. Your home, like everyone else's here, is made for function, not for comfort. It's called a black house, but not because it's gothic or edgy. It's black because the smoke from the peat fire stains every single thing. The walls, the ceiling, the rafters, your lungs. If it's inside, it's black. The roof is thatched thick with straw, layered over a wooden frame that creaks threateningly every single time the wind changes direction. The structure itself squats low to the ground, not out of humility, but because tall buildings have a tendency to blow away. Inside, the floor is just compacted dirt, occasionally covered in rushes that need to be changed far more often than they ever get changed. One corner of the room has been roughly fenced off for the animals. Yes, they're inside. Heat is incredibly hard to come by, and a cow gives off a surprising amount of it. Plus, if the wind outside keeps howling the way it is right now, you're going to be cuddling that cow like it's your childhood teddy bear. There's no glass in the windows, just a crude wooden shutter that you close at night or during storms, which is most nights. There's a single doorway, maybe covered by a thick wool curtain or a rough-hewn door if you're particularly lucky. Otherwise, it's just open to the cold. People like to imagine medieval life as being rustic and charming. This isn't that. This is mud. This is smoke. This is livestock stepping on your foot in the middle of the night. And if you think insulation is a modern problem, you're right. But it's also your problem right now. The cold leaks in from every direction. The walls are made of stone, but they seem to hold the cold like they're hoarding it. The roof isn't much better. If you happen to sit too close to the outer wall, you'll wake up with ice crystals in your hair. The blankets are made of wool, sure, but they're thin and heavy at the same time, and most of them are second-hand, meaning they've seen things you really don't want to think about. Still, you do what you can. People hang animal skins over the door and windows to block the worst of the drafts. Some even layer moss between the roof thatch to try and slow the drip of melting frost. It's not perfect, but then again, nothing here is. And oh, the draft. It's not a slight breeze kind of draft. It's the kind of bone-deep chill that creeps in like a gossiping neighbor. Quiet, rude, and absolutely impossible to get rid of. You've got a fire going, sure, but it doesn't really heat the room. It just stakes out a small patch of warmth directly around itself. And even then, that's only if you sit within licking distance of the flames. Anything beyond that radius is basically the Arctic tundra. You find yourself rotating slowly in place like a roasting chicken, trying to toast one side of your body without accidentally setting your cloak on fire. This is a skill that everyone here learns at a young age, the art of the partial thaw. One side of your leg feels like it's sweating, while the other is essentially a popsicle. Furniture is minimal. There's maybe a rough table, a bench, and if someone in the family was particularly handy or managed to steal something nice, there could be a wooden chest or two. Beds, if they even exist, are nothing like what you'd want to sleep in. A simple wooden frame stuffed with straw, covered in itchy wool or a threadbare animal pelt. You share it with at least 2 other people, probably 3. Privacy isn't really a thing. Body heat is. There's a weird kind of comfort to it, though. The closeness. When the wind is howling outside and everyone's huddled together near the fire, telling stories, sharing whatever thin stew is left, it's easy to forget just how cold it really is for a moment. You can almost trick yourself into thinking you're warm. Here's a quirky historical note for you. In some communities, livestock weren't just kept inside for warmth. They were also considered to be named family members. There are actual records of cows having names, being mourned when they died, and even being mentioned in songs. You don't joke about that around here. If your only source of milk, warmth, and potential dinner has a name like Mareg or Sumas, you show her some respect. And let's not forget, there are no bathrooms. There's a chamber pot in the corner if you're lucky. Otherwise, it's a brisk nighttime walk to the edge of the croft with a torch and a prayer. You try not to slip on the ice or step in something worse. The ground outside is basically a communal litter box for both humans and animals alike. In the morning, a few unlucky souls will have to shovel it all into the midden heap. And yes, it's frozen solid. Good luck with that. But this rough way of living has a certain logic to it. The architecture here wasn't designed for aesthetics. It was designed through centuries of trial and error. Tall buildings with peaked roofs got blown away. Flat roofs collapsed under the weight of snow. Crofts were built low, with thick walls, and were often sunken slightly into the earth to steal what little geothermal heat they could. In some places, people even built their homes directly into the sides of hills. Nature isn't an enemy here, but she's certainly not your friend either, so you learn to work with her when you can. There's some debate among archaeologists about how uniform these homes really were. Did every family build the exact same kind of house? Or were there local variations in materials, layouts, and warmth levels depending on the geography and resources available? Some remains suggest that wealthier clans had more spacious dwellings, sometimes even with separate quarters for their animals. But for most folks, a house was just one room, all-purpose, all the time. You can hear someone outside chopping wood. That's your fuel for the week. If you have trees, that is. If not, you're back to digging peat. Your hands are already cracked and raw from the cold. Your nails are black with dirt. There are no gloves, just calluses and complaints. And when it's wet outside, and it's always wet, it makes everything so much heavier. A single peat brick can feel like you're dragging a corpse if it's soaked through. But still, you keep going because what else is there to do? The croft may be crude, but it's your only refuge from a winter that seems to want to eat you alive. It's where you sleep, where you eat, where you listen to stories, where you pray, and where you wait for the sun to finally return. And outside, the wind keeps blowing because it never really stops. Not here. You wake up hungry again. Not the polite kind of hunger you feel when you decide to skip lunch, but the gnawing, hollow ache that makes your ribs feel loose and your brain feel weirdly floaty. It's been like this for days, maybe even weeks now. It's hard to tell anymore. Time gets all muddy when you're eating the same grayish stew for every single meal. Or worse, when there isn't any stew at all. This is winter in medieval Scotland, and if you thought freezing to death was the worst part, surprise. Hunger is right up there, grinning at you from the shadows like it has all the time in the world to wait. The food situation is, in a single word, grim. Every village handles it a little differently, but most of them have the same basic plan. You harvest what you can in the late summer and fall. You salt or smoke whatever is perishable, and you dry everything else. You cram it all into whatever storage space isn't already full of tools or rodents, and you hope you didn't miscalculate. Because if you did, You've just condemned your family to a very long, very slow kind of death. No pressure. Your winter pantry, if we're being generous and calling it that, might include some barley meal, oats, dried peas, salted meat, which is usually pork or fish, and maybe a root vegetable or two if the ground showed you any mercy. There's no fresh bread unless someone managed to dry the grain and keep a bit of yeast alive. There's no fruit unless someone brined some apples in a barrel and then remembered where they put it. And there's definitely no sugar. Sweet things are rare and mostly forgotten by this time of year, like distant childhood dreams or the feeling of having all your toes. Today's breakfast is thin porridge. Again, it's just water, oats, and a sprinkle of salt if you're living wild. There's no milk. It either went sour weeks ago or the cow dried up. If you're really lucky, there might be a scrap of smoked fish dropped in to add some flavor, which is a very generous way of describing it. The texture is lumpy, and the smell hovers somewhere between a barn floor and an old sock. But you eat it anyway because what's the alternative? In the lean years, the meals stretch even thinner. People start boiling bark, eating boiled nettles, and making broth from bones so old you have to smash them open just to suck out the very last trace of marrow. There are actual records of this. Archaeologists have found bones that have been cracked, boiled, and scraped over and over again until they were practically dust. That wasn't just being efficient, that was desperation with a ladle. And yes, let's go ahead and address the rumors. Cannibalism was technically rare, but it wasn't unheard of. There are scattered reports from famine years whispered about in the later centuries. Entire villages were lost, children disappeared, a cousin went to look for turnips and just never came back. Were they eaten? Who knows? The line between folklore and fact gets really blurry in the snow. But when the food runs out, people do things they never thought were possible. You start staring at the family dog with an unsettling amount of math in your eyes. It's quirky fact time. There were actually laws in some parts of Scotland about the communal use of food stores. In tight-knit clans, it wasn't unusual for the chief or the headman to ration food and redistribute it during the hard winters. There was a certain honor in keeping people alive, but there was also pressure. If someone was caught hoarding, they might wake up to find their storehouse mysteriously emptied, and no one would ever admit to doing it. Because food wasn't just about survival, it was political. It was power. That means that food storage became a kind of sacred ritual. Every single bit of grain was protected like it was gold. People dug underground pits to keep root vegetables cool but unfrozen. They hung meats from the rafters to keep them dry and away from the rats. Salted fish was stacked in barrels, layered carefully like a sad, oily lasagna. The whole system was incredibly delicate, and if any part of it failed, if a rat got in, if mold took hold, if someone got greedy, it could collapse the entire thing. There were some winter meals with cultural importance too. Believe it or not, holidays like Yule or Imbolc offered a chance to bring out something a little more special. Maybe a better cut of meat or something sweetened with honey, if anyone still had any honey left. These weren't feasts like you see in the movies. They were small moments of comfort, a reminder that not everything about winter was punishment. And yet, food was never far from anyone's mind. It defined your day, it woke you up, it decided what chores you'd do, collect firewood or go ice fishing. Maybe it even determined who you spent time with. If someone had a better stash of food, you might suddenly decide to drop by their croft, all casual-like, pretending it was just a social call when really your eyes are locked on that pot simmering in the corner. Some villagers kept chickens, and if you did, eggs were gold. They were literal life givers. The problem is that chickens don't lay very much when it's freezing. They just huddle together, barely clucking, and you start looking at them more for their meat than for breakfast. But again, you wait, you stretch, you scrape the bowl clean because winter isn't a sprint, it's a siege. There's a debate among historians about just how severe the Scottish winters were during the medieval period. Some believe the weather was more temperate in the earlier centuries, only turning nastier during the Little Ice Age in the 1300s and beyond. Others argue that even before then, the combination of high rainfall, poor soil, and short growing seasons made food security a constant struggle. Whatever the case may be, it's clear that food shortages weren't a freak event. They were expected. Even the children felt the weight of it. They were sent out to dig for roots, gather moss for kindling, or guard the food stores from pests. There was no kids' table during the winter meals. Everyone ate the same bland, soupy gruel, and everyone hoped it would last. By late February, the hunger had turned sharp. The stores are down to almost nothing. People start thinning out their portions. More water goes into the porridge, fewer scraps go into the stew. You can see it in people's faces, cheeks hollowing out, eyes sinking, hands trembling from the cold and the lack of calories. You stop expecting to feel full. Now you just hope to feel not worse. Tonight, there's talk of trapping. Someone swore they saw rabbits in the lower glen. Someone else says it's a complete waste of time. They've already been picked clean by the next village over. But you go anyway, because it beats sitting by the fire and thinking about how your stomach feels like it's folding in on itself. Outside, the wind is bitter. Your feet crunch on the frost. Every breath cuts. But if you bring back something, anything at all, you're a hero. You're the savior of dinner. And if you don't, well, there's always more bark to boil. The fire sputters a little lower tonight and nobody bothers to add more peat. You're trying to ration it just like everything else. That's the problem with winter here. It's not just one thing, not just the cold, not just the hunger, not just the wind that sounds like it's trying to whisper insults through the cracks in the door. It's all of it, stacked together in a kind of slow, rolling misery sandwich. And tonight, the topping is smoke. Lots and lots of smoke. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, blinking through the haze. Your eyes are stinging. Your lungs feel heavy. Someone across the room coughs that deep, gravelly cough that's starting to sound a little too familiar. And nobody says anything because what can you possibly say? You're all breathing it in, every hour of every day. The thick, tarry cloud of burning peat, the only heat source for miles, and also quite possibly the reason your chest feels like it's filling up with wet sand. Peat is a miracle in a way. There are no trees out here, not in any significant numbers. The highlands are mostly treeless, thanks to a few thousand years of enthusiastic deforestation and a general environmental indifference. So when winter comes knocking, you turn to the bog. Peat is basically ancient plant matter that's been squished and marinated in swamp juice for millennia. You dig it up in thick bricks, dry it for weeks or months if you're planning ahead, and then you burn it in your hearth for heat and light. and for the vague sense that you're not completely powerless against nature. The problem is, peat smoke is not subtle. It doesn't just waft gently into the night. It sits, it clings, it curls upward, and then, with no chimney to guide it out, it just kind of lounges around the top of the room like it pays rent. That's why they call them black houses. Not for the color scheme or the mood, but because the ceilings and rafters are literally black with soot. And that soot, it gets into your clothes, your hair, your food. It coats your pots. It slides down the walls and gets under your fingernails. It slowly lives inside you, a creeping presence in your chest. If you're very old or very young, you're the first to feel it. The coughing starts, and then the chest pain follows. There's no word for chronic bronchitis in your village, but plenty of people understand what it looks like when someone starts shrinking away under the weight of their own lungs. It's not just the coughing either. There's eye damage, sinus problems, and a strange hoarseness that you can't seem to shake, no matter how much hot broth you sip. But you still sit by the fire because the alternative is freezing to death. It's always a trade-off here. You want warmth, then you have to breathe in a little more death. You want clean air. Go stand outside until your teeth fall out from shivering. What's strange is how you stop noticing it after a while. The smoke just becomes part of the air, part of you really. You adapt. You learn to duck under the lowest swirl of smoke when you walk across the room. You figure out the best spot to sit where you're warm but not wheezing. You learn to squint through the haze as if it's just a fog inside your own house. And sometimes, someone tries to get fancy. There are rumors of crofts with actual smoke holes cut into the roof. Primitive vents that let some of the smoke escape. Maybe even a chimney if you're unimaginably rich or resourceful, but those are extremely rare. Most people here just live with the smoke. It's the devil, you know. Now, not to be dramatic, but modern studies have looked into this kind of indoor air quality, specifically in peat-burning homes in later Scottish history, and the results are pretty grim. High levels of particulate matter, an increased risk of lung disease, eye irritation, and a reduced life expectancy. Scholars argue about just how bad it got back in the Middle Ages, but it's safe to say that if you lived to a ripe old age out here, you did it while coughing. But back in the present, your medieval present, that is, there's no such thing as clean air. You blow your nose and it comes out gray. You stir a pot and the top layer has a thin film of soot on it, like it's been sprinkled with ash. And you eat it anyway because, honestly, the ash might be the most flavorful part. Someone opens the door to head outside and the sudden rush of fresh air slices through the smoke like a knife. It's cold, painfully, brutally cold. But for a moment, the room feels bearable. You take a deep breath and then cough instantly, your lungs unused to anything that isn't 80% combustion byproduct. Then the door closes, and the smoke settles back in, as patient and suffocating as ever. Your clothes stink, everyone's do. You don't even notice until someone new arrives from another village and smells slightly different, more fishy than smoky maybe. And then it hits you just how much you all reek. But it's not like anyone is bathing regularly. Not in this weather. The water freezes, soap is a luxury, and you're not about to strip down for a scrub unless you want to get hypothermia and a visit from the Kayleach herself. Here's a fun fringe fact for you. Some people believed that the smoke actually protected you, that it drove out bad spirits and kept illness away, which is weirdly ironic considering how often it caused illness. But again, in a world where invisible forces are blamed for everything from the plague to sour milk, it makes sense. If your whole family is still breathing, then maybe that black ceiling overhead isn't so bad after all. The kids don't complain because they've never known anything else. They run around the room playing in the smoke like it's a fog from a haunted moor. Their cheeks are red, their noses are constantly dripping, and their hair is thick with the smell of fire and livestock. They sleep closest to the hearth on the coldest nights, their little bodies curled up like cats, breathing in the smoke, slow and deep. You glance up at the ceiling and wonder how long it's been since anyone cleaned it. Not that it really matters. You'd need a ladder, a miracle, and the kind of optimism this place doesn't support. Besides, even if you scraped it clean, it would just be blackened again by next week. Some things just are, and still the peat burns because it has to. You feed it another brick and watch as the flame catches. It's slow to start always, but it eventually flares to life with a hiss. The fire doesn't roar. It just murmurs, a steady whisper in the dark. It's not enough to make you truly warm, but it's enough to make you stay. And outside, the night is darker than it has any right to be. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, though it doesn't help much. It's made of wool, sure, but not the soft, luxurious kind you're probably imagining. This is the rough, scratchy, sheep still attached in spirit variety. It itches constantly, and despite its weight, it somehow lets every whisper of wind and moisture slide right through to your skin. You try not to think about how many winters it's seen, or how many people before you have worn it, or what exactly that crusty patch near the hem is. Some things are better left unidentified. In medieval Scotland, clothes aren't made for fashion. They're barely even made for function. They're patched, worn, and repurposed until they're more thread than fabric. If something rips, you sew it. If it gets stained, you just keep on wearing it. If it smells, and it does, you just pretend you don't notice. Winter isn't a time for clean laundry anyway. The water's frozen, soap is expensive, and wearing wet clothes means death. So the rule is simple: keep it dry, even if that means keeping it dirty. You're wearing layers, not because they're particularly warm, but because that's all you have. An undershirt of coarse linen, stiff from too many washes in cold water. A tunic of heavy wool, dark and full of holes. Maybe a cloak or an overcoat if you've inherited one from someone who died with the good sense to hang on to it until the very end. Your legs are wrapped in wool hose, itchy and sagging, fastened with strips of leather or twisted cloth. On your feet, if you're lucky, are leather shoes, cracked and misshapen. If not, you're wearing wool foot wraps that are already damp from melted frost and yesterday's panic run to check the snares. And there's no such thing as waterproof here. Not really. Everything soaks through eventually. The wool helps to retain some warmth when it's wet, but it's a losing battle. Once you're damp, you stay damp. You can try to dry off by the fire if there's room, or you just don't. More than one villager has come down with a chest cold after walking back from the fields with rainwater dripping down their back. And around here, a chest cold can be the first step to an early grave. Still, people do their best to get creative. Cloaks are pinned at the shoulder with brooches or wooden toggles, sometimes layered with fur around the neck if someone in the household managed to trap a fox or steal a pelt from someone less lucky. Hats and hoods are stitched from leftover cloth or occasionally felted wool, stiff and lumpy, but at least there's something to trap the heat that's trying to escape through your skull. Mittens are rare. Fingers are often left exposed, red and cracked, more like tools than limbs. Some of the elders still wear garments dyed with natural plant colors. Muted yellows from lichens, browns from tree bark, soft grays from iron-rich mud. But winter tends to bleach everything into one uniform palette of survival beige. The only pop of color might come from a plaid or breekin if you're from a Highland clan that still holds tight to its traditional patterns. Not the modern tartans we romanticize now. These are more like bold, rough weaves with earthy streaks of green and brown, woven on narrow looms, draped and belted, and above all, functional. And speaking of belts, yes, you wear one. Everyone does, not for fashion but for utility. It holds your knife, maybe a pouch, maybe some dried herbs. You never know what you'll need out in the cold. Your hands are often too numb to dig around in your pockets, and this way your gear is always at the ready. You don't have much, but what you do have needs to be on you at all times. Now here's something slightly bizarre but true. Some people stuff their clothes with straw. Yep. Just jammed it right in there between the layers to trap body heat. It worked, in a way, like medieval insulation. The downside was that you looked like a lumpy scarecrow and probably squeaked when you moved. But when it's a choice between fashion and frostbite, dignity gets left at the door. And speaking of fringe facts, let's talk about lice. They're everywhere. You're itching right now and you're not even sure if it's from the wool or the bugs. But the truth is, lice are a part of daily life. Everyone has them. You comb them out when you can, pick them out of the seams, and just accept the rest. During the winter, when bathing is nearly impossible, the lice practically throw a party in your layers. There are even traditional songs and jokes about them. Little rhymes told by the fire, mostly as a way to keep from screaming. So yes, you're layered up, but you're not layered well. Modern thermal strategies are not a thing. There's no moisture wicking, no breathable fabrics. Everything is thick, scratchy, and heavy. Your clothes weigh you down, especially when they're wet. And walking uphill in them feels like dragging a reluctant sheep behind you. Yet you don't dare take them off. You wear them to sleep. You wear them to eat. You wear them until they fall apart or someone dies and leaves you a better set. There's a debate among historians about just how uniform these outfits were across Scotland. Some argue that Highlanders and Lowlanders had vastly different dress styles, influenced by trade, clan identity, and their access to materials. Others believe the basics were pretty much the same. Wrap yourself in whatever you have, make it last, and pray for spring. What's clear is that warmth was a constant priority and a luxury. There's evidence of fur linings in wealthier homes, of imported textiles for the nobility. But for most people, warmth came from wool, fire, and body heat. And yes, the cold gets into your bones, not just your hands and feet, but deep down. The kind that makes you move slower, think slower. You start to dread the moment when you have to get undressed for any reason. Changing your clothes becomes a rare, planned-out event, usually involving someone standing nearby with a blanket and another peat brick. People sleep in their clothes not out of laziness, but because taking them off could be a death sentence. Tonight, you try to sleep again, wrapped tight in your cloak, your legs curled up under you like some hibernating beast. Your feet are cold. Your hands are worse. You tuck them into your sleeves and breathe slowly, trying to ignore the wheeze in your chest and the itch behind your knee. Someone stirs beside you and pulls their blanket closer. You hear the soft rustle of straw and cloth, and then only the sound of breathing. Slow, deep, and cold. Outside, the frost creeps up the walls again, quietly, like it's checking to make sure you haven't forgotten about it. You haven't. The sheep aren't doing well. You can tell just by looking at them. The way their wool clumps together in frozen tufts. The way they huddle together near the wall of the croft, bleeding low and miserable, like they know something's coming. And something is coming. More frost, maybe another blizzard, or maybe just a long stretch of icy nothing that quietly ruins everything. Because out here, winter doesn't kill with drama. It kills with silence. In medieval Scotland, livestock were lifelines. They weren't just animals. They were food, clothing, income, warmth, status, and hope, all rolled into one shaggy, muddy package. Especially the sheep. If you had sheep, you had wool. You had trade value. Maybe a little milk if the ewe was feeling generous, and eventually, if it came to it, you had meat. But during the winter, they were just as vulnerable as you were, maybe even more so. Farming, such as it is, shuts down completely by November. The ground is too hard to till, the snow is too thick to dig through, and the wind makes every outdoor chore feel like a punishment from some forgotten god. The fields sit frozen, the soil split open like dry bread. What little grass remains is brittle, yellowed, and buried beneath a layer of frost. The animals that survive the winter aren't really eating. They're enduring just like you are. You've brought the most fragile of the livestock inside the croft, of course. There's barely any room, and the smell is ambitious, but it's better than losing them. The cow stands silently in the corner, her breath misting in the air as she shifts, occasionally dislodging the hay scattered beneath her hooves. Two goats curl up by the fire if no one is fast enough to claim that space first. And the sheep, they get the shed or the lean-to or whatever patch of shelter you've managed to cobble together from scrap wood, dried turf, and an increasingly shaky sense of optimism. Feeding them is the hard part. You planned for this. You stored hay. You kept grain. You dried bracken. You made a careful count of everything back in October. Doing mental math and hopping your neighbors weren't lying about how much they'd already burned through. But now it's January, maybe February, and your stores are lower than they should be. The sheep are eating the worst of what's left. Tough stalks, bark, dried leaves that were swept up in a hurry during the last clear day. One of them has started chewing at the wall. Another one tried to eat a piece of frozen cloth. You're running out of options. Sheep don't show weakness easily, but when they do, it happens fast. One day they're standing, the next they're not, and the next they're stiff and silent. You bury them if the ground is soft enough. If not, you just drag them to the edge of the woods and let nature take its course. Scavengers have to eat too. It's not personal. Nothing is in the dead of winter, and once a sheep is gone, you feel it immediately. That's one less fleece come spring, one less thing to trade at the market, one less source of meat. Though let's be honest, most people hesitate to butcher their livestock until the situation is truly dire. You don't kill a sheep just because it's hungry. You wait, you pray. And only when the family is down to boiling shoe leather and adding snow to thin out the stew do you even consider it. And even then, there's a fight. Because slaughtering means giving up, and giving up means that the winter has won. Still, there's the practical side of it. The meat doesn't go far, but it lasts longer in this kind of cold. Outside, the temperature is nature's butcher shop. You salt what you can, you smoke some of it in the croft, though the peat smoke doesn't really help the flavor. The rest you cook slowly, carefully, making sure nothing is wasted. The bones go into the broth. The organs become a meal of their own. And the fleece, if it's salvageable, gets stored. It might be stiff with frost, but it's still useful come spring, if spring ever comes. Historical records show that livestock mortality during harsh winters could reach devastating levels. Some years, entire flocks vanished, starved, frozen, or claimed by predators that crept in from the wild. Wolves were still around back then. They came down from the hills, lean and silent, drawn by the smell of desperation. A lone sheep, already weak, didn't stand a chance. There's an open debate among scholars about how effectively medieval Scots managed their winter livestock care. Some argue that the integration of animals into croft life, bringing them indoors, even into a shared living space, was a smart survival tactic for both the animals and the humans. Others suggest that these conditions actually increase the transmission of disease, especially respiratory infections. Honestly, both are probably true. But when your survival depends on a single, bleeding, woolly lump, you don't have the luxury of debating sanitation. Out by the lean-to, you find one of the sheep standing oddly, its legs braced, its eyes half-lidded. You already know what this means. You reach out and pat her side. You feel the slow rise and fall of her breath. It's thin and labored. She won't last. You've seen it before. There's a kind of resignation in these creatures, like they know they weren't made for this. Their ancestors may have grazed on softer hills in gentler climates, but these sheep, they're just trying to survive the same frozen misery that you are. And here's a strange little cultural twist. Some families named their sheep, not all of them. Many were just the ewe or the brown one, but occasionally you'd hear a name. A real one, Morag, Bonnie, Old Red. It added a weird tenderness to the whole thing. It made butchering a sheep in March feel more like a funeral than a meal. You weren't just eating meat. You were saying goodbye to a member of the household. It might sound sentimental, but when you spend every single day staring at the same animals, relying on them, depending on them, yeah, the names start to stick. That night, you share a bowl of thin mutton broth with your family. It's salty, warm, and smells faintly of smoke and fur. No one talks much while eating. The room is quiet except for the occasional clink of spoons and the soft bleating from outside. You don't ask whose meat is in the pot. You don't have to. Afterward, you wrap yourself in your cloak again, trying to ignore the way your stomach still feels hollow. Outside, the wind picks up. A hard, sharp wind from the north. You can feel it in the bones of the house. You can feel it in your own bones. And you think about the sheep, what's left of them, and how much longer they can hold on. How much longer you can hold on. The ale is flat again, but you drink it anyway. Not because you like the taste, though. Let's be real, after a few mugs, it grows on you in the same way that mold grows on cheese. You drink it because it's safer than water. In fact, in this frozen, mud-slick corner of medieval Scotland, ale is about as close to a health drink as you're going to get. It hydrates you, it gives you a few measly calories, and it doesn't come with a complimentary bout of dysentery. So down the hatch it goes. Water here is a gamble. The wells freeze over. The streams run icy and quick, but they're often shared with livestock, and less charmingly, with everything the livestock leave behind. Boiling it would help, sure, but firewood and peat are in short supply and are reserved for things that actually matter, like not freezing to death in your sleep. So you drink ale. Everyone does. Toddlers, elders, monks, your uncle who smells like wet wool and bad decisions. All of them sip the weak, cloudy brew from cracked mugs just to stay alive. This isn't the frothy, golden ale you might be imagining. It's thick, brown, and often full of sediment. Some batches are barely alcoholic, just enough fermentation to kill off the worst of the germs. Others are stronger, brewed longer or with a heartier grain, and can hit you like a cartwheel to the forehead if you're not careful. But even then, the buzz is more of a side effect than the goal. This isn't partying. This is survival with a mildly warm glow. Brewing is a communal skill. Every family has someone who knows the method. The process is simple in theory. Malt some barley, boil it, strain it, cool it, add yeast if you have any yeast, and then wait. But in practice, it's a delicate art of timing, temperature, and not accidentally poisoning yourself. If your batch goes wrong, you don't waste it. You just strain it a second time, maybe mix in some herbs to mask the off taste, and then pretend it's medicinal. The women handle most of the brewing in the village. They're called ale wives, and their role is quietly vital. The good ones are respected, maybe even feared a little. A skilled alewife could make or break a family's winter. If her brew went bad, you'd see it in the sick faces around the hearth. If her batch turned out strong, people smiled more, they even laughed. For a few hours, the cold didn't feel quite so sharp. That was no small magic. Of course, there were rules. Even back then, people understood the power of drink. Too much ale, and suddenly your neighbor's sheep starts to look like a personal insult. Fights happened. Slurred arguments out in the snow, someone swinging a club with no balance and even less aim. The village elders usually intervened, sometimes with stern words, sometimes with a solid whack to the head. Drunkenness was tolerated, but only if you could still pull your weight come morning. If you didn't, well, you might find yourself mysteriously short on firewood or waking up with the unpleasant realization that someone had accidentally borrowed your cloak. And yet, ale was so woven into the fabric of life that even religious leaders allowed it. Monasteries brewed their own, of course, finer stuff with more consistent recipes and ingredients brought in from trade routes. The monks knew what they were doing. Their ale was stronger, smoother, and better stored, often kept in cool, dry cellars carved into hillsides or rock. And perhaps not coincidentally, their winter survival rates were higher. When you're warm, fed, and sipping on professionally brewed ale all winter, it's amazing how holy your life can feel. Back in your croft, your family shares a mug. Yes, a single mug, passing it around after the evening meal. It's still warm from the fire, and though it smells a bit like sour grain and old socks, no one complains. You sip carefully, let it slide down your throat, and feel a flicker of warmth bloom in your belly. It's not much, but it's something. And right now, something is everything. There's even a word in Old Scots for the kind of warmth you get from ale. Cossagach asterisk, they might call it, though some argue that term came later. Still, the idea holds true. That blend of contentment, firelight, a full stomach, and slightly flushed cheeks. For a brief moment, the world doesn't feel like it's actively trying to kill you. But not all drink is created equal. Some villages brew stronger stuff. mead occasionally, if honey is available, or herbal concoctions that smell more like medicine than pleasure. There's even a tale of a certain spiced ale used during the midwinter festivals, steeped with wild herbs, bark, and something that may or may not have been hallucinogenic mushrooms. Did people see visions during those long, dark nights? Maybe. Did the visions tell them that spring was coming? Absolutely. Were they right? Almost never. There's also the occasional debate among scholars about how alcoholic medieval ale actually was. Some argue that the daily table ale was so weak it barely qualified as booze, while others believe it had enough of a kick to explain the number of brawls recorded in local legends. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, strong enough to matter but weak enough to keep functioning. Unless, of course, you wanted to disappear into a good buzz, in which case you just pour another mug. Tonight, after your sip, you stare into the fire for a long time. The peat crackles softly. The mug warms your hands. Outside, the wind has stilled for once, and the snow is falling in that eerie, silent way that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. You let the ale dull your thoughts, not into a haze, but into a calm. You think about the days ahead, about the dwindling grain sacks, the dying sheep, the heavy smell of smoke in your clothes. You think about spring, if it's ever coming and when. You think about how many people won't make it there. But for now, you just take another sip. Because it's warm, because it's safe. Because it's the only clean thing left in the world. It's midwinter now. The nights are long, dark as ink, and stretched across the land like a wet wool blanket that never lifts. The kind of dark that seems to press against the walls of your croft, just waiting for the fire to die so it can creep inside. You can feel it in your bones that we've crossed the halfway mark of winter, the tipping point of light and shadow. But it doesn't feel like a celebration, not really. It just feels heavier. But tonight, something's different. There's a stir among your neighbors, a low buzz of expectation, the kind of tension that only builds when people are cold, bored, and slightly desperate for any excuse to do something besides shiver in silence. It's time for the midwinter festival. Now you might be picturing a medieval party with roasted boars, tumbling jesters, and hearty laughter echoing off stone walls. Yeah, no. This is Scotland in the winter, in a rural village where your biggest luxury is a second-hand cloak that smells like turnips and regret. But even here, even now, people need a break. And midwinter, whether it's called Yule, the feast of St. Bridget, or just that night with the extra candles, is your best chance for one. You gather with the others near the longhouse. It's nothing fancy, just a slightly larger croft with a roof that leaks marginally less than yours. Inside, the fire's already burning and someone's gone all out. There are dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a pot of something vaguely sweet simmering near the hearth, and a single taper candle burning in front of a carved wooden figure. It might be St. Bridget, or it might be an older goddess, her features softened by smoke and time. No one says for sure. In this village, some things are still left unspoken. Midwinter festivals in medieval Scotland were a strange, glorious mashup of old pagan traditions and newer Christian ones. Depending on the year and the church's current mood, you might be singing hymns one moment and dancing around a bundle of straw the next. There are old stories passed down from the elders, tales of the Oak King and the Holly King battling for control of the seasons. There are rituals meant to encourage the return of the sun, lighting fires, burning last year's greenery, and occasionally scaring off evil spirits by banging pots together like a bunch of drunk farmers, which, coincidentally, most people are tonight. Because this is the one time of year where you break into the good stuff. That stronger ale, maybe a few apples that were stored under straw, a dusty jar of honey from the abbey if someone was clever or generous. And if a family is lucky enough to have saved a sausage or two, out it comes, sliced thin and handed out with a quiet reverence like communion. Children are laughing. Adults are trying to remember how to smile. Someone starts humming a tune that quickly turns into a song. And then, suddenly, people are singing. Not beautifully, not in harmony, but together. The kind of singing that reminds you that your voice still works, that your lungs haven't given up entirely, that there's still some human left under all the wool and smoke. And then comes the storytelling. Always the stories. Tonight's tale is about a Selkie woman who wandered inland one winter, lost her sealskin in the snow, and married a farmer who found her. But when spring came, she found the skin again and left with a look that made the cows cry for 3 days straight. It's sad and strange, and no one's sure if it's supposed to be a warning or a love story or maybe both. But it fills the air. It matters. These tales are old, older than the church, older than the written word. They're told by candlelight and remembered through repetition. Some people say they keep the world turning, that if the stories ever stopped, so would the sun. Is that true? Probably not. But in the middle of a winter this cold, belief is often more powerful than fact. Here's a fun historical tidbit for you. Some midwinter customs involved torchlit processions around the village boundaries. It was symbolic, of course, a way of warding off the darkness, reaffirming the community and reminding the land that people still lived here. In bad years, these walks were silent. In better years, there were songs, even shouting. And in truly reckless villages, someone might wear an animal mask, leaping out from behind trees to frighten winter away. You wouldn't want to meet that guy after his 4th mug of ale. Of course, not everyone joined in. Some stayed behind, too sick, too old, or just too bitter to celebrate. And sometimes you couldn't help but notice the empty spots, the people who didn't make it through the last few weeks. The neighbor who'd been coughing, the boy who went hunting and never came back, the old woman whose fire had gone out. Their absence sat in the corners of the room like smoke, thick, quiet, and impossible to ignore. But for a few precious hours, none of that wins. Not the cold, not the hunger, not the grief. Just laughter. The kind that bursts out suddenly and surprises even the person doing it. You laugh so hard your ribs hurt, and someone jokes that you should save your breath for the next blizzard. Someone else accidentally knocks over a candle and half the village panics, but it's fine. It's fine. The house didn't burn down. Not tonight. There's still a debate today among scholars about how widespread or uniform these winter traditions were across Scotland. Some say the Christian church tried hard to stamp out the pagan remnants, replacing them with saints' days and holy masses. Others argue the blending was more peaceful, even practical. People weren't about to give up their only festival just because the name on the candle changed. And honestly, in a place where survival is the only real religion, no one's too fussed about the fine print. Eventually, people drift home. The fire dies low. You wrap yourself in your cloak and step back out into the snow. It's quiet again, the air sharp and clean. You can see your breath in the moonlight curling like fog. And for the first time in weeks, you don't feel entirely defeated, because winter hasn't won yet. And maybe, just maybe, it won't. You wake to the sound of hooves crunching in the snow, but it's not the slow, steady rhythm of someone hauling supplies or checking traps. This is faster, more urgent. You sit up, your cloak still wrapped around your shoulders, and you just listen. A few others are stirring too. Their faces are groggy, mouths half open, trying to place the sound. It's not an everyday noise. It's a bad one. Someone's coming. And no one rides this fast in the dead of winter unless something's gone very, very wrong. There's a knock, or rather a thump on the door, the kind that doesn't wait for permission. The door creaks open against the packed snow, and a young man staggers in, his cheeks raw with windburn, his eyes wide and rimmed with cold. He doesn't speak for a moment, just leans forward, panting steam into the room. Then, in a voice that sounds like cracking ice, he says the words that no one ever wants to hear. There's been a raid. You feel the mood in the room shift instantly, like all the warmth just got yanked out with the draft. No one moves, no one even breathes. A raid in the middle of winter. You'd think the cold would stop things like that, fighting, theft, neighborly murder, but no. Sometimes it actually encourages it. In places like this, where survival is a month-to-month negotiation with nature, desperate people do desperate things, especially if they think someone else's barn is fuller than their own. The man explains between chattering teeth. A neighboring village, maybe 10 miles to the east, was attacked just before dawn. Crofts were burned, livestock were stolen, and a few people were left dead. One of them was old Scotlan, the weaver. The raiders came fast and left even faster, disappearing into the woods before anyone could get organized. And now the snow has already half covered their tracks. The room explodes into murmurs. Names are exchanged. Theories fly around. Some say it was the McKendries. They've always been half-wolves anyway. Others argue it must have been outsiders. Maybe bandits pushed south by the harsher weather up north. But a few people stay quiet, their eyes narrowed. They know how fast a neighbor can turn on another neighbor when the oat bin runs dry. You might not think of Scotland's winters as a time for warfare, but historically, small-scale violence didn't stop for the snow. Large campaigns, sure. No one's marching 1,000 men through a blizzard. But for clan feuds, petty grudges, and desperate survival raids, winter offered the perfect cover. The darkness lingered longer. The sounds carried differently. Tracks could vanish in a matter of hours, and no one ever expected it. That's what made it so effective. Tonight, you sleep with your knife a little closer. It's not a good knife, more of a sharpened stick with aspirations, but it's what you've got. The croft's door is barred, though you're keenly aware of how little it would actually take to kick it in. You listen to the wind and wonder if it's covering the sound of more hoofbeats, more men, more fire. And you're not alone in this paranoia. The next morning, the village meets to decide what to do. There's no formal leadership, just the same old argument with slightly colder fingers. Some want to send out scouts. Others want to move the livestock closer, even if it means crowding the crofts even more. A few whisper that maybe it's time to raid back. You shift uncomfortably at that. You've never taken a blade to another man, let alone done it over some barley. But if someone tried to steal your food, your fire, your life, wouldn't you? One thing is agreed on quickly. Travel is now dangerous. The roads, such as they are, have turned slick and treacherous, perfect for ambushes or sudden accidents. You remember just a few days ago how your feet slipped on a frozen patch right outside the croft. Now imagine trying to walk on that in the dark, holding a torch and a sword with frost forming in your eyelashes. Every journey is a gamble. Still, people have to move. Messages need to be sent. Alliances have to be maintained. You volunteer to carry one, partly out of obligation and partly because staying still feels worse. So you bundle up, accept the warning looks from the others, and start the 10-mile walk across frozen ridges and ice-glazed glens. The landscape is both beautiful and terrifying. The snow-covered hills stretch on endlessly, broken only by the skeletal shapes of trees and the occasional ruined wall of an older, abandoned croft. Ravens perch high above, silent, watching, waiting. You trudge forward. Each step is a soft crunch. Your breath is loud in your ears. The cold seeps up from the ground, even through your boots. After an hour, your legs are numb. After 2, you stop feeling your fingers, but worse than the cold is the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the waiting kind. Every bend in the trail could be hiding something, someone. You think you hear voices once, carried on the wind, but it's probably just the wind. Probably. There's a debate among scholars about how common winter raiding really was in medieval Scotland. Some claim it was rare, madness really, to risk travel and bloodshed when survival was already so precarious. Others argue it happened more often than we think, but just wasn't recorded unless it escalated into something bigger. What we do know is that clan rivalries didn't follow a seasonal calendar. Vengeance doesn't thaw with the spring. If someone wronged your family in September, you might just decide to return the favor in January. You finally reach the neighboring settlement. It's eerily quiet. A few of the buildings are still smoking. Charred beams poke through the snow like the ribs of a giant beast. People are moving slowly, clearing the wreckage. Their eyes are blank. You deliver the message, help is coming, such as it is, and then you stay to help lift a fallen wall, to carry out what's left of someone's possessions. A child is crying, and you pretend not to notice how thin his arms are under the blanket. When you return home that evening, no one talks much. You sit by the fire, passing around a bowl of stew that tastes like salt and ash. Everyone is waiting for the next attack, waiting for news, waiting for winter to end, though that seems the least likely of all. You sleep with your boots on that night, just in case. The sun doesn't rise so much as it just glows faintly behind a thick wall of clouds, the kind of light that makes you question if it's actually day or just a lighter shade of night. You step outside and your boots crunch into the frozen earth. Everything's quiet, too quiet. Which is strange because this morning you're supposed to march to war. Well, a raid really, but it might as well be a war to you. You didn't want to go, most of the people didn't, but after the attack on the nearby village, talk spread fast. Heated words building up like sparks in dry tinder. No one knows who the raiders were for sure, but that hasn't stopped the speculation. And when people get scared, they don't look for answers. They look for targets. It's not always the same thing. So now, a handful of men, your neighbors, your cousins, that guy who smells like boiled turnip and shouts when he's nervous, have decided to strike first, before they can do it again. They say it's self-defense. You're not so sure, but you said yes anyway because saying no makes you look weak. and looking weak in a winter like this is just an invitation to disappear. You wrap your cloak tighter, strap a dull blade to your side, and join the others. The snow underfoot is patchy, crusted with ice in some places, slick with mud in others. The wind is low, but it's biting, slicing into your skin through every careless seam. This isn't the kind of weather for fighting, but that doesn't seem to matter. Vengeance has no chill. The walk takes hours. You follow narrow trails through pine forests that are eerily quiet at this time of year. There are no birds, no rustling, just the crunch of your boots and the occasional grunt from someone up ahead. The air smells like cold bark and damp wool. You wish it smelled like anything else. There's no armor, just cloaks, maybe a buckler. A rusted helmet passed down through 2 generations, dented from God knows what. The weapons are all mismatched. Axes, knives, old swords with notches in the blades, even a farming scythe. One guy brought a club with nails in it. You pretend not to think about how he made it. And yet, you're not a soldier. None of you are. You're farmers, hunters, fishermen. People who normally spend your days just trying not to freeze or starve. But now you're warriors, if only for a morning. Because this is how it works out here. Clan feuds, old grudges, food disputes, they don't wait for spring. Historically, winter raids weren't common in large-scale warfare. Scotland's weather made sure of that, but in smaller, rural settings they happened more often than people think. A rival family steals a cow. You steal one back. They burn your shed. You torch their grain. It's a slow, petty, miserable cycle of an eye for an eye stretched across generations. And winter, it just made the stakes that much higher. You reach the other village around midday, if you can even call it a village. It's smaller than yours, maybe 4 or 5 crofts huddled together, smoke drifting weakly from the peat fires inside. There are no defenses, no walls, just tired-looking people who probably weren't expecting company. The leader, if you can call him that, raises a hand, and suddenly everyone around you is moving, rushing forward, screaming, charging across the snow like demons out of some fevered dream. You stand frozen for a second, your heart slamming into your ribs like it's trying to escape. Then you run, too. There's no choreography, no tactics, just chaos. You rush at a door, shoulder it open, and find a man barely older than you staring back in shock, holding a wooden spoon like it might actually help. You raise your knife, but your arm doesn't move. You're frozen, not by the cold, but by confusion. This man isn't the enemy, he's you. He's scared, hungry, wearing the same type of cloak. His hands are shaking in the exact same way that yours are. Someone shoves past you and knocks him to the ground. You turn away. Outside, you hear shouting. A pig squeals. Someone screams, a high-pitched and awful sound. A fire has started either on purpose or by accident, it's not clear. One of your neighbors is kicking open a grain bin, laughing. Another is dragging a chicken under his arm. A third has just collapsed in the snow, clutching his leg, blood soaking through his hose. So much for revenge. And then, just as fast as it started, it's over. Your group regathers at the edge of the woods, panting, flushed, muttering half-hearted congratulations or excuses. No one talks about what they saw or didn't do. You don't speak at all. The march home is quieter. There's a scholarly debate about how these raids were remembered, how memory and myth tend to blend in places like this. Some say that stories of heroism were exaggerated, made up to compensate for the guilt. Others say the guilt was just buried like so many things in winter. But either way, the people who survived didn't forget. Not really. And neither do you. When you get back, no one cheers. There's no feast, no bragging, just the same frostbitten faces, the same sagging crofts. You hand your stolen chicken to your sister without saying a word. She doesn't ask where it came from. That night you lie awake for hours, watching the fire, listening to it crackle, trying not to hear the sounds again. The screams, the pig, the silence afterward. You're not a soldier, but now you've seen what soldiers do. The castle looms like a frozen bruise on the horizon. Its stone towers are black against the gray winter sky. You squint at it from the edge of the woods, your boots sunk in frost-bitten mud, and you wonder what it must be like inside. Warm, probably, dry, maybe even comfortable. That thought feels almost sinful. Comfort in the middle of winter. That's for nobles, not for people like you. Still, it's hard not to imagine it. The flickering torches, the heavy furs, the meat sizzling on spits while someone tunes a harp in the background. Meanwhile, your own version of luxury is a spoon that isn't cracked and a bed that doesn't smell like a goat. Castles in medieval Scotland weren't just fortresses. They were ecosystems, insulated worlds where the elite could ride out the worst of the season in relative ease. Not easy, mind you. No one had it truly easy back then. But it was certainly easier. If you were lucky enough or cutthroat enough to be born a noble, winter came with options. More food, more fuel, more people to freeze on your behalf. And inside the walls of a keep, things worked a little differently. For one, you had stone walls, thick ones. You may be thinking, stone, that sounds cold. And yes, it is cold. But it's also sturdy, windproof, and much better at keeping out wolves, raiders, and the kind of draft that makes your teeth ring. The higher up in the tower you lived, the less damp it was. The Great Hall, usually on the first or second floor, was the heart of winter life. A big, echoing room with a central fire pit, or a hearth so large you could practically park a cart in it. The ceilings were high, the walls hung with tapestries, some for decoration, some just to keep the wind from whistling between the stones. And yes, you heard that right. Tapestries, long stretches of woven cloth depicting battles, saints, or just vague, swirly designs, were hung from the walls like medieval insulation. These things weren't just pretty, they were practical. They absorbed sound, held in the heat, and gave bored people something to look at during those endless winter evenings when everyone's joints ached and the minstrels had run out of songs. The castle dwellers had layers too, of course. Nobody was strutting around in just their tunics, but their clothing was a cut above, literally. It was tailored to fit, dyed with expensive pigments, and often lined with fur from animals you've only ever heard of in stories. A noblewoman might wear a gown of wool lined with squirrel, rabbit, or even ermine if she was showing off. Lords wore cloaks heavy with fox fur, trimmed in silver thread. Meanwhile, you're still trying to sew the same patch back onto your sock for the fourth time with a needle made from a chicken bone. And let's not forget the beds. Proper beds. 4 posters, if you were rich enough, hung with curtains to trap the heat. The mattress might be stuffed with feathers, not straw. And the sheets, actual sheets, might even be laundered more than once a season. Bed warmers were a real thing, too. Little metal pans filled with hot coals slipped between the sheets before you climbed in. Imagine that. A bed that warms you before you even get into sleep. not one that tries to slowly consume your soul with damp mildew. Oh, and the meals. Winter didn't stop the feast train at a castle. While you're gnawing on boiled oats and mystery stew, the people inside those walls are slicing into roast game, cured hams, wheels of hard cheese, honeyed pastries, and wine that doesn't taste like vinegar. They've got pantries and storehouses, sometimes even ice pits where snow was packed during the cold months to keep things fresh. Sure, the lower ranks, the servants, the guards, the cooks, ate simpler fare, but even that was better than the bark broth slurry you've been trying to pretend is soup. But here's where it gets weird. Even with all that luxury, castles weren't cozy. They were still cold. Stone doesn't heat evenly, and those big halls lost warmth fast. Fires burned constantly, but the smoke still built up. Without proper chimneys, it either hovered near the ceiling or drifted out through narrow slits in the walls. The floors were hard and drafty, often covered in rushes mixed with herbs to mask the smell of whatever had recently died, spilled, or been stepped in. And despite all the servants, people still had to deal with chamber pots. The higher up you lived, the more steps there were between you and the nearest guardrobe, the medieval answer to plumbing. Essentially, it was a toilet chute that let waste drop down the side of the castle wall. In the winter, this would freeze. So yes, even nobles had to contend with frozen medieval poop sculptures if they lived high enough up. I bet that wasn't in the fairy tales. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some castles had entire rooms called warming chambers, built specifically for heat. They were rare, expensive, and often used by the sick or pregnant. The room would be built small, sealed up tight, and heated with an oversized hearth. You'd sit in there for a while, thawing out, before returning to the broader icebox that was the rest of the castle. Kind of like a medieval sauna, minus the eucalyptus and spa music. And of course, castles weren't just homes. They were seats of power. Winter was a time for politics, too. Letters were sent, alliances were whispered, and marriages were arranged in private chambers. The people inside weren't just surviving. They were strategizing, planning for the spring, watching their neighbors, listening to rumors that the McKendries were stealing sheep again, and wondering whether to send men, gold, or just more threatening glances. There's a scholarly debate over just how much better castle life really was in the winter. Sure, the elite had better tools and food, but disease still ran rampant. The fires still smoked. And in some ways, the isolation inside those thick walls during the long, dark months made the cold feel even more suffocating. You had warmth, yes, but you also had boredom, power games, and expectations. And watching your back became just as important as keeping your toes warm. Back in your own croft, you curl up near your small hearth and picture what it must be like inside that towering keep. Maybe the Lord is sitting on a high-backed chair, sipping mulled wine. Maybe his lady is wrapped in velvet, listening to a bard sing about fire gods and frozen rivers. Maybe they're not that different from you after all, just better dressed and less smoky. But then the wind howls through the crack in your wall, and you're reminded once again that you're not up there. You're down here, with the cold, with the dark, with your patched socks and the memory of a feast you'll never attend. And spring still feels 100 years away. Your neighbor's kid is sick again. He's got that same wet cough that everyone seems to pick up by midwinter. The kind that rattles through the chest like old bones in a box and just doesn't go away, no matter how many hot compresses or whispered prayers get thrown at it. You pass his croft on the way to check the animal pens, and you can hear him hacking from 10 paces off. It's the kind of sound that sticks in your own throat just listening to it. Inside, his mother is crouched by the fire, boiling something in a soot-blackened pot. The smell is sharp and herbal, dried meadowsweet and thyme, maybe a bit of rosemary if she's been saving the good stuff. You step through the door frame just far enough to catch her eye, and she gives a little nod without looking up. You don't have to ask how he's doing. The expression on her face says enough. This is medicine in the winter. Smoke, boiling leaves, and a prayer you don't really believe in. If you're lucky, someone in the village knows more than just folk remedies. Maybe there's a healer who learned from their grandmother who learned from hers, passing down tips like, rub this on the chest, or don't eat that root unless you want to see demons. But most of the time, it's just guesswork, trial and error, and crossed fingers. And in the deep of winter, when illness spreads like frost across the rooftops, there's a whole lot of error. There is no doctor, not unless you live near a monastery or a very generous noble. Even then, the doctor might just be a monk with a basket of dried herbs and a book written in Latin that he can't fully read. Most people here have to rely on what they know, what they've seen work, and what the old women whisper about behind closed doors. And if none of that works, you either wait or you prepare for a burial. Medicine back then was a messy blend of observation, tradition, and outright superstition. Some of it actually worked. You can't knock the value of willow bark tea for pain or honey for wound care, but a lot of it was little more than ritual and wishful thinking. People carried charms against fevers or amulets made of bone, and they painted symbols above their doors to ward off spirits. You might find garlic stuffed in a sick person's pillow or a bowl of water set under the bed to catch the illness as it left the body. It sounds ridiculous now, but if your child was coughing up blood, you'd probably try anything too. And sometimes, that anything got a little weird. In one corner of the Highlands, people believed that burning the feathers of a white rooster and inhaling the smoke could cure a winter fever. In others, a black dog seen at your doorstep was a bad omen. Either someone in the house was going to die, or they already had and just didn't know it yet. Some folks swore that if you scraped frost off the north side of a standing stone and stirred it into your ale, it would ward off the plague. You tried that once. The ale just tasted like rock. But when things got truly bad, people would call in the wise woman. Every village had one, maybe two. Not quite a healer, not quite a witch, but definitely someone who existed in that awkward middle space. She knew which roots were poisonous, which herbs helped you sleep, and which teas made you see your ancestors in the firelight. Some feared her, while others relied on her. She always smelled like smoke and moss and mystery. You're not sure if she was ever young. No one can remember. And while scholars today love to debate the line between folklore and medicine, the people living through it didn't care. If a charm worked, it worked. If it didn't, well, you buried the charm with the body and moved on. There wasn't time for philosophy when the snow was high and your throat was closing up. You remember once as a child being so feverish that your mother placed you next to the fire and rubbed goose fat on your chest. Then she wrapped you in furs and said nothing. She just sat there, staring at the embers like they might offer her some kind of answer. You lived. She never told you what else she tried. And the dead. They didn't get grand funerals in the winter. The ground was too hard, the labor too exhausting. Sometimes the bodies were just stored until spring, tucked away in cold corners or laid gently in caves, wrapped tightly and covered with evergreens. The first thaw of the year was often met with a grim sort of to-do list: patch the roof, repair the field walls, and bury the dead. This season isn't just cold, it's full of ghosts. Tonight the wind sounds strange, like voices or laughter from far away. The older ones in the village say this is the season when the veil is thinnest, that the dead walk beside the living, not with malice necessarily, but just watching, hovering, as if they're checking in to see who's next. You brew your own little tonic before bed. Dried nettle, a pinch of yarrow, and a drop of something the wise woman gave you last fall and told you to only use when the air feels sharp. The taste is bitter. It clings to your throat like tree sap, but you drink it anyway because your chest has felt tight for 3 days now, and you're starting to hear a rattle in your own breath. After, you sit near the fire and rub your hands together. They're dry, cracked, and stained green at the fingertips from mixing herbs. You watch the flames and think of the coughing child, the healer, the dark shapes outside your window. Then you wrap yourself tight in your cloak, tuck your knife under your straw pillow, close your eyes, and hope the medicine works. It starts with a boil. Just a small, angry bump on the neck of the shepherd boy who helps tend the goats. No one thinks much of it at first. He says it hurts, sure, but everything hurts in the winter. Your hands, your joints, your feelings, so it's nothing special. Then he gets feverish and starts muttering nonsense in his sleep. Then the swelling turns black, and by the next morning he's dead. That's when the real fear starts, because you've heard the stories. Everyone has. Travelers from the south whispered about it last year. Some said it came from the rats. Others said it came from the ships. Others said it came on the wind, a punishment for sin or for forgetting the old gods. Nobody really knows, but one thing is always the same in every version. Once it starts, it doesn't stop. Not until the land is quiet. Not until the woodcutters stop cutting, until the church bells ring and no one comes to pray. The plague doesn't care that it's winter. You'd think the cold might slow it down, freeze it, trap it in the ice. But no. If anything, the close quarters, the stagnant air, and the smoky coughs only make things worse. When people huddle together to keep warm, they also huddle together to spread disease. And there's no running away. The roads are too frozen, the woods are too thick, and the illness is too fast. The day after the shepherd dies, his mother takes ill, then a cousin, then the boy who helped bury him. By the 3rd day, their croft door is marked with a chalk symbol, smeared and desperate, a cross with lines through it. The village doesn't have a name for what's happening, not officially, but everyone knows. The priest stands in the square and mutters a prayer with too many. Forgive us and not enough. Here's what to do's. He burns a bundle of herbs, juniper maybe, and waves the smoke around like it'll trap the sickness in the air and force it back to wherever it came from. You stand nearby, your face wrapped in a scarf, your eyes watching the horizon like salvation might be galloping in on horseback. It isn't. People try everything. The wise woman suggests hanging garlic at the door. Someone else swears by crushed nettle brewed into a tea. Another family tries fasting, starving the sickness, they say, But the sickness doesn't seem to care. It takes the strong, the weak, the old, the young. It shows up in the middle of the night, in the middle of a prayer, in the middle of a mouthful of broth. Here's the strange thing, though. Some people survive, even after the fevers, even after the buboes swell and break. They're left shaky, scarred, and forever changed, but they're alive, which makes it all the more maddening because it means that maybe there's a way to make it through. But no one knows how. Scholars today still debate what version of the plague made it into the Highland villages during the 14th century. Was it truly the Black Death, Yersinia pestis asterisk, or just a localized epidemic that was misidentified by terrified chroniclers? Some argue that the colder climate would have slowed down the fleas and rats needed to spread the disease. Others say that the cramped, smoky crofts were more than enough to accelerate it. Either way, something deadly moved through these villages, and winter didn't stop it. You decide to isolate yourself as much as you can. You drag your bedding further from the hearth, away from the others. You boil your water, wasting precious peat, and you refuse to share mugs. You avoid the marked houses. You eat garlic raw until your breath could kill a crow at 10 paces. None of it makes you feel any safer, and every time you hear a cough now, your spine stiffens. By the end of the week, 4 families are sick. 2 entire crofts are empty. The snow around the edges of the village is disturbed. Shallow graves have been dug hurriedly in the frozen earth. In one, you recognize the shape of a girl you once traded firewood for dried apples with. Her hand is sticking out from the snow. No one goes back to cover it. Eventually, the sickness slows. Whether it's because the worst of it has already claimed its victims, or because the survivors have locked themselves in their homes, no one's sure. But the silence that follows is worse than the coughing. There are no children laughing, no one calling out over the hill, no dogs barking. Even the wind seems subdued. One night you dream of masks, long-beaked and black-eyed like bird spirits in the dark. You've never seen one, of course. Those are from the city's plague doctors, as mythical as dragons in a place like this. But still, you see them in your dream, standing in the doorway of your croft, just watching. You wake up drenched in sweat, unsure if it's from a fever or from fear. People recover, but they don't come back the same. Some of them walk slower. Some don't speak much anymore. Others just stare at the fire like they're waiting for something. A few of them leave. What's left of their families packed onto sledges, and they just disappear into the trees. You suspect you'll never see them again. Eventually, the village tries to move on. Someone suggests a prayer day. Another says to burn all the bedding. A third just shrugs and starts patching the roof of his croft. Life goes on. Not because it should, but because it has to. You pass the empty crofts sometimes. They've gone still. Snow is packed up against the doors. Smoke never rises from the chimneys. One still has a scarf flapping from a window. You don't know why, and you're not brave enough to find out. By now, you've forgotten what it was like before. Before the boil, before the silence, before you started holding your breath every time someone sneezed. And worst of all, winter's not even over yet. You find yourself leaning in closer to the fire these days, not just for the warmth, but for something else. A distraction. The kind of distraction that can take you, for just a little while, out of your aching bones, your hollow stomach, and the growing list of neighbors you'll never speak to again. And that's where the stories come in. Tonight, like most nights now, the hearth becomes a kind of stage. The room is dim. the shadows stretching tall along the croft walls, and everyone's pulled in close, wrapped in their cloaks and ragged blankets, their shoulders pressed together. The firelight flickers across their tired faces, casting everyone in a golden, ghostly light. Outside, the wind scratches at the door like it wants to be let in. Inside, someone clears their throat and begins, "Have I ever told you about the Kelpie of Loch Dorch?" And just like that, you're gone. Because here, in the thick of winter, storytelling isn't just entertainment, it's survival. It's a balm for the brain, a blanket for the mind. The tailies stretch longer in the cold months, embroidered with extra details, extra flourishes. There's no rush, there's nothing else to do. So why not linger on the part where the hero gets swallowed whole, or where the trickster ties a demon's shoelaces together and throws him in the river? Some of the stories are funny, absurd tailies of talking cows and foolhardy shepherds. Some are tragic. Some are so old that no one remembers how they end, so the storyteller just makes something up on the spot and no one argues. The best stories are the true ones, or at least the ones that are claimed to be true. A cousin who saw a selkie washing her hair on the rocks. An uncle who met a fairy woman in the woods and came home with white hair and no memory. You've heard them all a dozen times, but it doesn't matter. You'll gladly hear them a dozen more. Oral tradition in medieval Scotland wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline. The Gaelic bards, the ****, were trained from childhood to memorize hundreds of tailies, genealogies, poems, and historical events. Some even claimed they could recite the lineage of kings going back to the gods themselves. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But their stories had power. They passed down knowledge, they preserved culture, they warned against danger. In the winter, when the landscape tried to swallow you whole, these stories reminded you that someone, somewhere had been through worse, and maybe, just maybe, they even survived. And every now and then, one tale cuts deeper than the others, like the one you're hearing tonight as the storyteller leans close to the fire, his voice low and steady. It's about a village not unlike your own. A harsh winter, too long and too cruel, with people starving and falling ill. But one night, a child disappears, then another. And they say it's the work of a creature from the north, the Nukilavi. Skinless and steaming, riding over frozen rivers in search of the weak. You shiver as he speaks. Not because you believe it, not exactly, but because a part of you does. Or maybe you just want to. It's easier to blame monsters than it is to blame the cold. And then the storyteller's voice softens. But the people of the village, he says, they did not give in. They burned fires all night. They carved runes on the lintels. They stood together even when they were afraid. He pauses. And when spring finally came, they were still here. It's not the best story, not the most exciting one, but it's what people need to hear tonight. A reminder that survival is possible, that even the worst winters eventually end. There's a strange intimacy to these nights. Everyone leaning in, whispering, remembering. Some people add their own verses. Others laugh in the wrong places. Children fall asleep mid-story, their heads on their mother's laps, their eyes fluttering shut just as a warrior slays his final beast. One old man who is nearly deaf insists on telling a story he's already told 3 nights in a row. No one stops him. It's comforting in its own way, like hearing a song you once loved, even if the notes are all wrong. You take your turn eventually. Not because you're brave or bold or particularly good at it, but because stories are meant to be shared, not hoarded. You tell the one your grandmother told you, the one about the woman who baked bread for the spirits living under the stone bridge and woke up one morning to find her cupboards full. You don't believe in bridge spirits, probably. But as the words leave your mouth and the faces lean toward you, their eyes wide, their mouths open, something warm coils in your chest. This is why the stories matter. Here's a little-known historical quirk. Many of the tales told during the winter were deliberately long-winded, not just to fill the hours, but to slow down time itself. There was a belief, especially in the older, pre-Christian traditions, that the cold months were spiritually dangerous. That time could slip, that the boundaries between moments or even between worlds grew thin. Stories anchored you. They kept the night from creeping in too far. And beyond that, they gave people a purpose. Children learned their heritage. Adults remembered their lost loved ones. The elders passed on lessons through metaphors, warnings buried in fables. Don't go out after dark, they'd say, or the washerwoman will mistake you for the dead. Don't whistle in the wind, they'd warn, or it might just answer you back. Tonight, after the fire burns low and the last story fades, no one speaks for a while. There's just the quiet crackle of the peat, the occasional sniffle, the rustle of shifting limbs as people settle down to sleep. It's late. The kind of late where time doesn't seem real anymore. You lie back, staring at the ceiling beams above you, blackened with smoke and age. You think about the tales you heard, the faces you saw around the fire. You think about the Nukilavi, about the Selkie bride, about the old man who swore he spoke to a standing stone, and it answered him in perfect Gaelic. Maybe you don't believe all of it, but you believe in the firelight, in the warmth of the voices, in the way a story can pull you out of the cold and hold you for a little while. And that's enough. Something's been skulking around the edge of the croft. You haven't seen it, not clearly, but you've heard it. At first, you told yourself it was just the wind. The wind makes all kinds of noises in the winter. It groans across the moor, it makes low whistles through the dry stone walls, and it slips softly under the thatch. But this sound wasn't like that. This was closer, heavier. A slow crunch of snow, a sniffing sound by the door, a soft scrape of a claw or a hoof against the wood. It was enough to keep you awake last night, curled up under your cloak, your blade tucked tight in your hand, just staring at the door like it might shutter open at any moment. And this morning there were tracks. Not clear ones, just broken, scattered depressions in the snow that wove around the croft and then vanished into the trees. It could have been a fox. It could have been a dog. It could have been something else. Predators don't hibernate here, not all of them. And in the harshest part of winter, when prey is scarce and starvation gnaws at even the cleverest of beasts, they come closer to the hearth, closer to the smoke, closer to you. You've always been told about the wolves, not in the bedtime story kind of way, but in real terms. Where they travel, how they move, what they sound like when they're hunting. Most winters they keep their distance, sticking to the deeper forests, picking off stragglers or raiding sheep pens that aren't well guarded. But this year has been bad. Food is low, and wolves, just like people, get desperate. You remember vaguely hearing about a man 2 villages over who lost his youngest to a pack. It was dark. They were returning from the river, hauling back buckets of ice-thick water, and the child had wandered just a few steps ahead. No one saw what happened, just blood in the snow and then silence afterward. By the time the men lit torches and ran out into the woods, whatever had done it was long gone. Of course, it might not have been wolves. Some say it's not just animals out there in the dark. You've heard the stories, half in jest, half as a warning about creatures that hunt in the winter. Not beasts, not men, but something in between. There's the Bayab Hen Sith, the winter woman in green who lures men from their fires and drinks them dry in the snow. There's the Fuath water spirits that rise from the frozen locks when the ice cracks just right. There's the Wolver, not a werewolf exactly, but more of a hairy, man-shaped thing with yellow eyes and a strange kindness that shows up at the worst possible time, or the best, depending on who's telling the story. Of course, none of that is real, right? But that doesn't stop you from fastening the door extra tight. It doesn't stop you from keeping the fire burning higher than usual. And it definitely doesn't stop you from listening, really listening, to the noises outside tonight. In reality, the biggest predator out here probably is the wolf. Gray wolves were common in Scotland for centuries, and they thrived in the winter. They hunted in packs, they moved silently, and they had the uncanny ability to just vanish into the trees like smoke. They were feared, yes, but they were also respected, powerful, intelligent, and depending on the region, even admired. Some clans adopted them as symbols. Others used their pelts in rituals. Some even believed that wolves were reincarnated warriors, returned to patrol the glens by moonlight. But they weren't the only danger in the dark. Sometimes the predators weren't animals at all. They were thieves, too. Raiders, outcasts, bandits who had been driven from their own villages and were now living rough in the forest, surviving off whatever they could steal or kill. They didn't howl like wolves, but they were just as deadly, especially when they were driven by cold and hunger. Sometimes they came in ones and twos, sometimes in groups. And unlike animals, they knew how to pick locks, how to wait, how to make the dogs go quiet. Which raises a thought you've been trying to avoid all day. What if what you heard wasn't a wolf? Tonight, you set out a circle of firewood around the edge of the croft. Dry branches from the brush pile, arranged so they'll snap if they're stepped on. It's not much, but it's something. You place your blade within reach again. You pile extra peat on the fire. The smoke curls up into the rafters, warm and choking. You don't care. You want the light. You need it. Just before bed, someone tells a story. Of course they do. It's an old one about a spirit that roams during the coldest nights of the year, looking for places where the fire has gone out. It knocks 3 times on the door, and if no one answers, it comes in anyway. The moral, they say, is to never let your fire die. Keep it burning always. Even if the peat runs low, even if the smoke hurts your lungs, even if it's just a tiny ember glowing in the dark. You think it's just superstition, obviously. And yet, you toss on another brick of peat before curling up near the wall. There's a scholarly theory about why so many winter legends across different cultures feature shapeshifters and animal-human hybrids. One idea is that these creatures represent the fear of losing your own humanity, of becoming something wild under pressure. Hunger can turn a man feral. The cold can drive him mad. And winter, above all, strips people down to their most basic selves. Maybe that's why wolves loom so large in the stories. Because the line between beast and man in the winter, it's as thin as ice. You drift off slowly, one eye half open, your ears tuned to every creak and gust of wind. The fire hisses, spitting softly. Someone nearby snores. Outside, you think you hear something. A step, a breath. No, just the wind, probably. Rain again. Not the soft kind of rain that makes you think of spring, but the miserable, sideways kind that soaks you through before you've even stepped off the threshold. It's cold, needling, and somehow manages to find every single gap in your layers. The collar of your cloak, the hole in your boot, that one weak seam under your arm that you swear wasn't there yesterday. You wrap your cloak tighter, pull your hood low, and try not to think about the fact that you're already damp and you haven't even made it to the goat pen yet. This is the worst kind of winter day. There's no soft snow, no crunch of frost, just wet, cold, and more wet. The ground is half thawed. The sky is a colorless smear, and every step you take sucks at your boots with that familiar, soul-deep squelch. The path between the crofts is a muddy soup, slick with manure, old straw, and whatever leaked out of the midden pile last week. Your foot slips, you curse, and then you do it again. And this is where the real danger lies. Not in the drama of blizzards or the growl of wolves, but in the slow, steady erosion of everything. Your patience, your warmth, your footing, and your clothes, especially your clothes. Your wool tunic has been damp for 3 days now. At first it was just the hem, caught in a puddle or dripped on while you were hauling buckets. Then it was the sleeves, then the back. Now it's all of it. A kind of clammy second skin that clings in all the wrong places and saps the heat right out of you like it's being paid to do so. You can't dry it by the fire. There's no room, and even if there were, it would take hours. Wool doesn't dry in the winter. It just sort of transitions from wet to less wet and then back again. That's the thing about medieval clothing. It's all made of natural fibers. Wool, linen, maybe some leather. And once they're soaked, they hold on to that moisture like a grudge. You can wring them out, hang them up, even lay them on a warm rock if the sun ever comes back. Spoiler alert, it won't. Still, they stay damp. And damp clothes in the winter mean only one thing: sickness. You can feel it creeping in, an ache behind your eyes, a heaviness in your limbs. The way your hands tremble even when they're near the fire. It's not a fever, not yet. Just a warning. A little whisper from your body saying, maybe you should stay dry next time. But there won't be a next time. This is just how it is. Someone in the village did try to make a sort of waterproof cloak once. They soaked it in tallow, beeswax, and a few herbs for luck. It repelled water for exactly one afternoon before it melted near the fire and left him smelling like rancid bacon. Still, he wears it anyway. He says the stink keeps the goats from biting him. Slipping in the mud is more common now. A young woman broke her wrist yesterday trying to haul water back from the stream. Another man twisted his ankle fetching firewood from the far slope. You don't heal quickly in this weather. Wounds stay open longer. Infection sets in faster, bandages rot, and you don't have the luxury of rest. So you limp, you favor the bad arm, you grit your teeth and you hope the bone knits properly even without splints or salves. And then there's the water, it's everywhere. Seeping into your boots, pooling in the corner of the croft where the thatch is thinning, dripping from the rafters in steady, soul-sucking plinks. Your bedding is damp. Your socks are damp. Your bread, somehow, is also damp. And no one knows how that happened because it was stored in a sealed pot. You find yourself dreaming of dryness. Not warmth, not food, just that delicious feeling of a blanket warmed by the sun. A shirt that smells like nothing at all. You fantasize about lying in tall, dry grass under a blue sky, but you push the thought away. It's dangerous. Delusions like that can lead to mistakes, and you can't afford to make any mistakes. Here's a strange fact you once heard from an old tanner. Leather shrinks when it gets wet, and then it hardens if it dries too fast. That's why your boots, which have been soaked for days, feel tighter than ever. That and the soles are worn so thin you can feel every single rock. You try wrapping your feet in spare wool, but it only delays the inevitable. Blisters, sores, and eventually frostbite. You've seen it happen. Black toes, flesh sloughing off. No one talks about it, but everyone knows someone who's lost a foot. Scholars often debate the daily toll of medieval winters, not just the big, sweeping dangers like famine or war, but the constant barrage of small, cumulative miseries. Some argue that the psychological strain was just as deadly as the physical one, that the persistent damp, cold, and discomfort broke people down slowly until they just stopped fighting it. Until they simply faded. You believe it. You can see it in the eyes of your neighbors. They don't look angry or sad, just worn. Hollowed out by too many wet days, too many spoiled meals, too many sleepless nights lying awake, counting the drips from the ceiling. No one even flinches anymore when something goes wrong. They just add it to the list. This afternoon, you try to dry your shirt. You take it off carefully, quickly, trying not to expose yourself to the full bite of the air, and you hang it by the fire. You rub your arms for warmth, your teeth chattering, watching the steam rise from the wool as it hisses. For a second, you wonder if it might catch on fire. You almost hope it does. At least then you'd have an excuse to ask someone for a new one. Eventually, you put it back on, still damp, maybe slightly less so than before. But it's too late now. Your skin is already cold again, and the ache behind your eyes is sharper. You lie down near the hearth, curling your legs under you, trying to fold into yourself like a blanket that doesn't work anymore. And you think not about spring, that's too far away, but just about tomorrow, and whether or not your boots will still hold. The children don't complain, not out loud. They're too used to it. Their faces stay serious, their small mouths pressed into thin lines, their cheeks raw with the wind and the cold. They shuffle from chore to chore with that quiet, watchful focus that kids shouldn't have yet. Not really. But when the days are short and the nights are colder than the grave, childhood just becomes something practical. You don't get to play when your fingers are cracked and bleeding. You don't get to dream when your dreams have frostbite. The youngest ones still giggle sometimes. You hear it now and then, muffled under scarves from behind a haystack, in that tight moment before bedtime when someone makes a face or lets out a fart loud enough to echo off the croft wall. But even those laughs feel stolen, like they weren't supposed to happen. The kind of joy you have to apologize for afterward. Winter isn't kind to kids. That's just the reality of it. You can see it in their feet, bare, swollen, wrapped in layers of damp wool that's more whole than sock. You can see it in their hands, chapped, red, shaking when they try to carry a bucket or hold a needle. And worst of all, you can see it in their eyes. They're older than they should be. The brightness has faded under weeks of a gray sky and gray porridge. You remember being that small. The sting of the cold in your lungs during the early morning chores. The terrifying crunch of ice underfoot. Knowing that a fall meant bruises or worse. The shame of wetting yourself in the middle of the night because you were too scared to go outside in the dark, where wolves and worse things might be watching. The chores don't stop for age. Children have to haul water, carry firewood, and feed the animals. What's left of them? They collect dung, too, drying it into patties for fuel. Their tiny hands shaping frozen waste into lifelines. No one spares them from the work because everyone is struggling. You either do your part or you don't eat. It's as simple as that. And yet there's a weird kind of resilience in them. They don't question the misery. They just adapt to it. You're watching one little girl now, no more than 7, tucking scraps of straw into the gaps in the wall near the goat pen. Her fingers are moving fast, automatic, like she's done it 100 times before. Maybe she has. She's whistling a tune as she works, off-key and tuneless, but it floats above the mud like something defiant. A group of older boys has gathered near the edge of the village. They're kicking a lump of ice back and forth, half-heartedly pretending it's a game. One of them laughs, then he trips, then he punches the one who laughed. And just like that, it's a scuffle. Not out of anger, really, but just out of the need to move, to feel something, to remind themselves that they're not just frozen statues waiting for the thaw. Children die more easily in the cold. That's the ugly truth. They're smaller, they burn through calories faster, and their bodies just can't take the same punishment as an adult's. In some villages, people would weigh the grain and ration out extra to the little ones, not out of softness, but out of strategy. Children are the future, after all. If you lose too many of them, your village dies with them. But not every place had that luxury. And when the food ran out, it was the smallest bowls that got emptied first, quietly, without any ceremony. A mother might give her child the broth and go without. A father might tell his son that the stew was better today, even though there was nothing left in the pot. These were acts of love, but they were also desperate bargains. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some medieval folk believed that if a child died in the winter, their spirit would linger until spring, trapped by the frozen ground, just waiting for the earth to thaw so they could finally pass on properly. That's why in certain parts of the highlands, you'd see dolls left on the edge of the moor or tiny bundles of cloth hidden under the trees. Offerings, apologies, proof that someone still remembered. You don't talk about the children who don't make it. No one does. One day they're coughing by the fire and the next they're gone. Sometimes the body gets buried, sometimes not. Sometimes the grief is just too raw to name. A woman will sit by the hearth for 3 days straight, not moving. A man will chop wood until his hands bleed, and then he'll keep on chopping. And still, the other children carry on. That's the strangest part. They adapt like moss on a stone. One girl lost 2 fingers to frostbite last winter. She still helps to turn the churn. One boy walks with a limp after falling on the ice last year. There was no healer, no splint, just time and a walking stick. He doesn't complain, he just walks slower. There's one game they play at night if the fire's warm enough and the elders aren't scowling. It's a kind of storytelling contest. One child starts a tale, a haunted glen, a river ghost, a knight who lost his sword, and the next child has to add to it. You're watching them now, huddled close together, their eyes wide, as one boy tells of a hag who lives beneath the snow and steals voices. The others lean in. They shiver, then they laugh, then they look nervously at the door. You suppose it's a kind of magic, the way they can still imagine, even in the middle of all this. It keeps them human. It keeps you human, too, just watching. There's a debate among historians about how children were treated in medieval Scottish villages, whether they were seen as precious or simply as smaller versions of adults. The answer seems to be both. They were loved, yes, but love didn't mean protection. It meant preparation, teaching them how to survive, how to endure, how to carry the torch when the elders couldn't anymore. Tonight, as the wind howls through the cracks in the roof, you lie close to the fire. The smallest children are already asleep, curled up like kittens in the corners, their breath visible in the cold air. You listen to the quiet, to the crackle of the peat, to the half-whispered story still passing between the older siblings. You watch a boy cover his sister with an extra scrap of cloth, tucking it around her without saying a word. And in that moment you feel something rare. Not warmth, not comfort, but hope. Sunday morning arrives in a hush. Not that the wind has stopped. It's still rattling at the shutters like it wants to remind you who's in charge. But something about today feels different, calmer. You can feel it in the way people are moving. A bit slower, quieter, as if they're all holding their breath. Not out of fear this time, but something else. Reverence, or maybe just obligation. This is the one day of the week that everyone in the village tries to clean up a bit. That means brushing the soot off your cloak, wiping the mud off your boots with whatever scrap of cloth isn't already soaked through, and attempting to look like you haven't spent the last 6 nights sharing a corner of the croft with a coughing pig. You smooth down your tunic, tie your belt a little tighter, and step outside into the cold. It hits you like a slap, sharp and immediate. But you don't flinch. It's Sunday. You're expected to walk into that cold with a sense of purpose. The chapel is half a mile away, if you can even call it a chapel. It's more of a stone box with a crooked roof and one tiny window that's so crusted over with frost, it might as well be a wall. Still, it's standing. It hasn't blown over, burned down, or crumbled. And in this climate, that alone feels like a small miracle. As you trudge through the slush and the crusted snow, you pass others making their way too, all bundled up in layers, their heads down against the wind, their faces grim but determined. The older ones are leaning on sticks. The younger ones are whispering jokes behind scarf-covered mouths. A few are carrying candles to light once they're inside, but the wind keeps blowing them out. Still, they try. That's the thing about this day. Even when the world is frozen solid, you try. Inside the chapel, the air is no warmer than it is outside. The walls are bare, the stone pews are colder than death, and the smell of wet wool and peat smoke follows everyone in like a second congregation. You find your usual spot near the back, close to a drafty corner where the wind sneaks in through a crack in the mortar. Your feet are already numb, but that's fine. You're not here for comfort. The priest arrives. He's not young and he's not old. He's just tired. He's wearing a simple robe that's been patched at the hem, and his hands are shaking slightly as he opens the worn book resting on the altar. He doesn't speak loudly. He doesn't have to. The room is so silent that even the rustle of his pages sounds holy. He begins the prayers, the Latin words rough on his tongue, and everyone murmurs along, not because they understand them necessarily, but because they remember. That's what religion is out here in the winter. It's not some grand enlightenment. It's just memory, repetition, something to hold on to. There's no sermon today, just the readings, some prayers, and a moment of silence for the dead. It lasts longer than usual. There are too many names, too many empty spaces on the benches, and yet there's something comforting in the ritual, something steady. In a season where the sky forgets to shine and the ground refuses to give, faith becomes a kind of anchor. It's not hope exactly, and it's not joy. It's just structure. A reason to get up, to wash your face, to light a candle, and to pretend that someone somewhere is listening. That doesn't mean that everyone here believes. Some people are here because they're scared not to be. Others are here because it's tradition. A few, like you, are here because the idea of a place where things are supposed to make sense, where there's order and meaning and forgiveness, feels better than sitting at home listening to the rafters creak. And then there are the ones who carry older beliefs. Quietly in the background, you see them glance at the standing stones on the way home. You notice the small bundle of herbs tied to the chapel door frame, the ones the priest always removes but never mentions. There's still room for both kinds of faith out here. Old gods and new saints, fire spirits and martyrs. If it helps someone survive the winter, no one argues too loudly. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some Highlanders continued to blend pagan customs with Christian ones for centuries, lighting candles to Bridget in the chapel, then leaving milk outside for her other self, carving crosses on their doorways, and then hanging rowan branches over the lintel for protection. It was a kind of dual loyalty, just in case. After the service, people linger for a bit. No one is in a hurry to return to their cold crofts and unfinished chores. They talk softly, they share news, they swap goods, eggs for kindling, honey for herbs. A neighbor hands you a twist of cloth with a bit of dried apple inside. You nod your thanks. You didn't ask for it, and they don't say why. That's just what people do here on Sundays. Tiny acts of mercy. Faith in human form. Back home, you sit by the fire and unwrap the apple. It's hard, chewy, and sweet in a way that makes your jaw ache. You close your eyes while you chew, pretending it's a feast. The rest of the day passes quietly. There's no hard labor, no hunting, just small tasks. Mending clothes, braiding rope, sharpening tools. Someone reads aloud and someone else hums a tune. It's not happiness, but it's something close to it. There's a scholarly debate about the true role of religion in rural medieval life. Some argue that it was imposed, a tool of control and guilt. Others believe it was a comfort, a shield against the constant grind of hunger and hardship. But here in your village, it seems simpler than that. Church is the only place where the silence doesn't feel empty, where repetition feels safe, where you can say the same words you said last week and believe they'll still matter next week, too. As night falls, the wind returns, fiercer than before. It wails down the chimney and rattles the shutter loose again. You fasten it with some twine and sit back down. The fire crackles. A candle flickers. You whisper a prayer under your breath, not because you're particularly devout, but because you need something to say into the dark. And when you lie down, your hands pressed together under your chin, you find yourself thinking about heaven. Not the grand cathedral kind. Just a room that's warm, a roof that doesn't leak, bread with butter and sleep without shivering. If that place exists, you'd go there tomorrow even if you had to go barefoot. You wake up to a sound that shouldn't be there. Horses, not just one but several. Their hooves are muffled but distinct in the slushy snow outside the croft. You sit up fast, your heart already halfway to your throat, and you glance toward the door. The others in your household have heard it too. You can see it in the way everyone has stiffened, in the slow, silent movement of their hands, reaching for knives, for staves, for anything remotely sharp. No one speaks. No one needs to. You all remember. The door doesn't burst open. Instead, there's a knock just once, slow and heavy. It's a warning or maybe a courtesy. Either way, it doesn't feel friendly. You pull the door open with numb fingers and come face to face with a soldier, or at least someone who's dressed like one. He's wrapped in layers of leather and mail, a cloak bearing a faded crest you don't recognize, and his legs are rusted with mud halfway up. Behind him are 3 more men on horseback, similarly dressed, their eyes sharp under their thick hoods. And behind them, you notice with a sinking feeling, are more horses. A whole line of them, stretching back toward the trees, all armed, organized, and as cold as stone. They say they're just passing through, just checking on the borderlands, just making sure that no one's harboring criminals or hiding stolen livestock. But you know what this is? It's a reminder. A reminder that even in the winter, even in a storm, even when everything inside you aches, politics doesn't sleep. This is life on the edge, the border between Scotland and England, where every frostbitten hill has hosted a dozen battles, where loyalties shift like snowdrifts, and where being in the wrong place at the wrong time means everything. These aren't raiders. They're official. Knights or something close to it. They're under orders, and that makes them twice as dangerous. You offer them what you have. Some dried fish, a bowl of broth, a space by the fire. You don't ask if they've come from a garrison or if they're part of a larger campaign. You definitely don't ask who they're looking for. You just smile and keep your eyes down. You've seen what happens to villagers that ask questions. They stay longer than they need to, poking through your stores, inspecting your tools, even eyeing your animals like they might just requisition them. One of them leans down and picks up your younger brother's carved wooden toy and turns it over in his gloved hand like it's evidence of something. Then he drops it in the ash. You don't move. Eventually they leave. They say thank you, but it sounds more like a threat than a farewell. One of them spits into the snow. Another lights a pipe with a coal from your hearth. Then they're gone. The hoof prints turning the white road to mud behind them. The door closes. Everyone exhales. No one talks about how close that was or how much worse it could have been. Because the truth is, winter doesn't protect you from war. If anything, it complicates it. And for villages like yours, caught between lords and kings, between counties and crowns, winter makes you vulnerable, too frozen to flee, too poor to bribe, and too exposed to hide. There's always been tension along the Scottish borders. For centuries, these lands have shifted back and forth, claimed, reclaimed, raided, and taxed by whoever had the bigger sword that decade. In the winter, the fighting slowed down, sure, but it never stopped completely. Skirmishes still happened. Spies still moved through the forests. Armies still crossed the moors, wrapped in furs and fueled by whatever they could take. And in places like this, loyalty is a flexible concept. You swear allegiance to whichever lord is nearest, or the one who hasn't stolen your sheep, or the one whose soldiers don't set fire to your grain store. Some years it's the Scots, some years it's the English, and some years it's no one at all. Just your village, alone in the snow, hopping that no banners appear on the horizon. There's a debate among historians about how much the average peasant really cared about the greater politics of the time. Did they follow the throne wars? Did they track which cousin of which king had declared themselves the rightful ruler this week? Probably not. Not in any detail, but they felt the consequences. They lived in the echo of every conflict. Every shift in power brought new taxes, new expectations, and new threats. You remember your father telling you about the last war, how the soldiers came through with torches and burned every barn, and then just moved on without looking back. How the village rebuilt with help from no one, just their hands, just wood, just time. And then it happened again 5 years later. So now when you see men on horses in the winter, you don't ask questions. You offer them food. You stay quiet. And you count your animals afterward. The next day, you walk along the edge of the woods and find hoof prints where they shouldn't be. You see a bit of cloth snagged on a branch. You wonder if they were looking for someone specific. A fugitive, a deserter, or maybe just a reason to do something. Soldiers in the winter have a lot of time on their hands. And when soldiers get bored, villages burn. Still, there's something almost laughable about it. As if the war between kings could possibly be worse than the war you're already fighting, with the cold, with hunger, with illness. As if politics could possibly matter when your hands are too frozen to hold a spoon. Back at the croft, you help your brother retrieve his toy from the ashes. The wood is scorched, one side blackened. He doesn't cry. He just turns it over, rubs the soot off, and sets it on the windowsill like a sentinel. You look out past it, at the gray sky, the hard earth, the distant road now empty, and you wonder how long it will stay that way. You wake up starving. Not just hungry, not the my stomach rumbled kind of hungry, starving. The kind of gnawing, dizzy, bone-deep emptiness that makes your whole body feel like a hollow log. You roll over slowly, not because you're tired, though you are, but because moving too fast makes your head spin. It's been 3 days since you've had a full bowl of anything. The oats are nearly gone. The salted fish is gone. The turnips have either sprouted or rotted. You don't even look at the grain bin anymore. There's no point. This is the kind of hunger that turns time into a joke. You stop counting the hours. You start counting your heartbeats, counting your swallows, counting how many more steps your legs will carry you before they just don't. Winter always brings hunger, but this year has been worse. Longer, colder, wetter. Everything that could have gone wrong has. The summer's harvest was poor. The rain came early. And now, in the dead grip of February, there's nothing left to stretch, nothing left to ration. Just 1 or 2 hidden stores, jealously guarded by people who are too ashamed or too scared to admit they planned better than everyone else. No one says the word, not out loud, but you're all thinking it. Famine. It's not a stranger here. It visits now and then, quiet, deliberate, and cruel. You've heard the stories from your grandparents. You've heard the songs about it. Soft, eerie tunes about families disappearing one by one, about whole villages vanishing into the snow. You always thought they were exaggerated until now. Today, you're chewing on bark. Literally. You strip it from a birch tree near the edge of the field, shave off the outer layer, and you scrape at the softer pulp beneath. It doesn't taste like anything, just fibers and regret. But it gives your mouth something to do, something to pretend that it's eating. The children are crying more now. They try not to. They hide in the corners or under the table, muffling their sobs with their hands or scraps of cloth. But it's impossible to be quiet when your belly is cramping and your body doesn't understand why it's being punished. And the adults, they just get quieter, a kind of slow, collective silencing. People move slower, they talk less, and they never smile. There's no energy left for anything but the absolute basics. Walking, watching, waiting. You measure strength in footsteps now. Whether someone can still carry a log, or whether they sit down halfway and just don't get back up. You share what's left, you have to, even if it means less for you, especially if it means less for you, because you know what happens when people stop sharing. There was a man last week. He had broad shoulders, a fast walker, always whistling while he carried buckets. One night he didn't show up for dinner. The next morning someone checked his croft. It was empty. There was no sign of him. The fire had burned down to ash. But the storage pit was open, cleaned out. He was gone. No one talks about it. But you all know he left with the food. Maybe to trade it. Maybe to run. Maybe just because he couldn't watch everyone else fade away while he still had something left. It's hard to say if it was cowardice or mercy. And then one night the whisper begins. Low, careful, like it's being passed between ghosts. Cannibalism. No one says it directly. No one accuses anyone. But you see the glances, the unease, the way someone starts sleeping closer to their children, the way the knives are kept asterisk on them now, not just near them. It's not happening, you think, you hope. But the stories are there. Stories of long winters, of desperate households, of strange stews that didn't smell quite right. Here's a fringe fact for you. There are actual medieval Scottish records that hint at such acts during extreme famines, though they're usually couched in vague language. Unholy consumption, turning on one's kin, never quite nomming it but never denying it either. A shadow in the margins of history. You tell yourself it won't come to that. Not here. Not with these people. But the truth is, the line between civilized and desperate is thinner than anyone wants to admit. One more week of this, maybe two, and who knows? You try to hunt. Of course you do. But the traps are empty. Nothing moves out there anymore. Even the rabbits have vanished. You swear you saw a crow a few days ago, circling low, but even that's gone now. Some say the animals have fled to higher ground. Others say they know when death is coming, and they don't want to be a part of it. There's a scholarly argument about whether the great famines of the Middle Ages affected the highlands in the same way they did southern Europe. Some historians claim the clans' rugged independence and subsistence farming protected them better. Others say that their isolation actually made it worse. That when the food ran out, there was no lord with extra stores, no town market with dried grain. Just the cold, just the snow, just you. Tonight, someone finds an old bundle of dried peas hidden under a floorboard. It's dusty, brittle, probably forgotten since the last bad winter. It might not even be edible anymore. You boil it anyway. The smell is strange, earthy, musty, a bit sour, but no one hesitates. You share it, small spoonfuls for each person. It doesn't fill you, not even close, but it stops the cramping for a little while. And that's the best you can hope for now. You lie down beside the fire, your head spinning. You think about food constantly now. The feel of bread between your teeth, butter melting on hot oats, the haunch of venison cooked over flames, the skin blistering and spitting fat. You can imagine it so clearly you can taste it. Then the hunger comes crashing back, and you realize your mouth is full of nothing but spit. Outside, it's snowing again. Soft flakes, quiet and relentless. It should be beautiful, but all you can see is one more day of frost that won't let go. One more day of waiting for something, anything, to grow. You see the first green thing in months, and it stops you cold. It's not a tree or a bush or anything dramatic. Just a small patch of moss tucked beneath a stone near the well. At first, you think it's a trick of the light. maybe some kind of lichen or even mold. But no, it's green, a bright, living, impossible green. You crouch down and run your fingers over it. It's soft, spongy, and alive in a way you'd almost forgotten the world could be. You don't call anyone over to see it. You just stay there for a moment, your knees in the mud, breathing in the scent of damp earth. It's barely anything, really, just a scrap. But it feels like a message, a promise, not yet, but soon. Spring isn't here yet, not quite, but it's coming. You can feel it in the air. It's heavier now, less biting. The wind still howls at night, but there's something new in its voice, something softer. During the day, the snow is melting in uneven patches, revealing the wreckage that was beneath it. Flattened straw, twisted roots, bones. The land looks bruised and exhausted, but it's starting to exhale. The sky even looks different. The endless gray is broken in places, replaced by slivers of a pale blue that make you squint. The sun is back, barely, but it's enough to cast shadows again. And that first shadow you see, long and stretched out across the snow, nearly makes you cry. You'd forgotten what it felt like to see yourself in full daylight. The animals can feel it too. The goats are louder. The chickens, what's left of them, are fussing more in their coop. You even hear a bird just once, just a few notes, but it was there. And you look up from your chores like someone just slapped you. Everyone else hears it too. They all freeze, their heads turning toward the trees, listening like it's the voice of God. This is the part of winter that people never write songs about, the in-between. It's not yet spring, but winter has finally cracked. And now the world is thawing slowly, awkwardly, like a drunk man getting to his feet. And just like that man, it's a little dangerous. The mud sucks at your boots. The ice melts during the day, then freezes slick again at night. The roofs are dripping constantly. Puddles are forming inside the crofts. The fires are struggling against the damp, but you don't care because it's changing. This is when the village begins to stretch. People are leaving their crofts more often now. They're checking the edges of the fields, turning over the soil with sticks and their fingers, testing its softness. It's not ready yet, but it will be. And after months of nothing, just the phrase, "it will be," is enough to stir something deep inside you. Today, you're helping to clear out the old grain store. It smells like rot and dust and shame. Most of what's inside is useless. Mildewed sacks, cracked barrels, mold so thick it looks like fur. But a few scraps can be salvaged, dried in the sun, and burned as fuel. It's a mess, but it's a spring mess, and that makes all the difference. You catch yourself humming just for a second. You don't even know what the tune is. Something your mother used to sing, maybe, but it escapes before you can stop it. You half expect someone to glare at you like they did during the worst weeks. But no one does. A few people even smile, not wide smiles. No one remembers how to do that anymore. But small ones like cracks in a stone. There's still hunger, of course there is. The stores are still low, but now the ground is soft enough to dig for roots. Wild garlic, nettles, bitter things, but fresh things. You gather what you can and bring it back in your apron like it's a treasure. That night's stew is thin, but it tastes alive. A bite of nettle between your teeth, and you could almost weep from the brightness of it. After so many months of gray mush, even bitterness feels like a feast. There's a ritual tonight. Not an official one, not church-sanctioned, just something the villagers do when the first green things appear. It's quiet. There are no drums, no singing, just a shared walk to the standing stone at the top of the ridge. You bring offerings, dried herbs, a twist of your hair, a pebble that's been warmed by the hearth. You lay them at the base of the stone and you whisper a hope. You're not sure what yours is. You start to say something for a good harvest, then you change your mind for warmth. Too obvious. In the end, you just whisper, please. You're not even sure who you're whispering it to. Some say the stone is a relic from the old gods. Others think it's just a marker, a grave, a piece of history no one remembers anymore. But standing there, as the sky turns gold at the edges and the wind smells just slightly of earth instead of ice, you feel it pulse. Or maybe that's just your own heartbeat. It's hard to tell. There's a scholarly theory that these small, local rituals, the offerings, the stone visits, even just the shared meals, were the psychological glue that held communities together during the hardest months. More effective than prayer, more honest than politics. Just people clinging to whatever pieces of meaning they could carve out of the cold. Tonight, you lie down by the fire, your stomach not full, but no longer empty. You can hear the dripping from the eaves, a rooster calling in the distance. You fall asleep with dirt under your fingernails from digging up wild roots. And you're okay with that because the ground is soft and spring is coming. Mud season. That's what they call it now. Not officially, of course, but often enough that it might as well be carved into the side of every barn and croft wall. Not winter, not spring, just mud. Infinite, all-consuming, ankle-snatching mud. The snow has melted, the frost has pulled back like a tide, and what's left behind is nothing short of carnage. The fields look like they've been churned up by giants. The paths between the crofts are indistinguishable from the litter-filled ditches, and every single step is a gamble. You either slip or you sink, and sometimes both. You used to complain about the frozen ground. You'd give anything for it now. It's even worse inside the crofts. The floors, which are packed earth for the most part, have turned spongy. Moisture is rising from beneath like the house is sweating. The straw mats have mildewed overnight. The smell is foul, thick, and sour. And there's no fire hot enough to burn it out. Your clothes never dry, not properly. The bottom hem of your tunic drags through the wet straw, and by midday, you're just walking around in a soggy rug. But despite the filth, there's movement. There's life. The village is waking up. You can hear more voices in the morning now. More people are out tending to fences, checking on the livestock, hauling buckets. They're grumbling, of course. It's hard not to when you've just lost your boot in a knee-deep puddle and had to fish it out like a dead fish. But there's an energy behind the curses, and that's something new. You head to the fields with a group of others. Your tools are slung across your back, your sacks are half empty, but they're ready. The soil isn't ready for planting yet. Not really. It's too wet, too cold. But people are preparing it anyway. Scraping away the muck, turning over the top layer, scattering ashes over the worst patches to try and soak up some of the excess water. No one says it, but everyone's thinking the same thing. If you don't plant soon, you don't eat later. The seed stores are small, too small. The rats took their share over the winter and the mold took the rest. What's left has to be handled like it's gold, measured, protected, whispered over. You remember your uncle counting out barley seeds one by one, placing them in a cloth pouch like he was counting coins. He did the same thing today, his lips moving silently, as if a miscount might somehow offend the seeds themselves. And speaking of rodents, they're back. There are mice in the walls, rats in the corners. You found one floating belly up in the rain barrel this morning. You didn't scream, you just fished it out with a stick and threw it in the brambles. But your skin still crawls. You know what they bring: disease, ruin, and teeth that are too sharp for creatures that small. There's a theory passed around the village that the rats know when the grain is ready, that they can smell it from miles away, and that spring to them is just a grand invitation. You've heard worse theories. One old woman swears that rats are the servants of ancient gods, a punishment for greed. You're not sure if she's wrong, but as bad as the mud is, as bad as the smell and the rats and the sopping clothes are, you're still grateful. Because it means that winter is actually over now. It means that things can grow again. Even if they won't, even if the season turns against you again, there's a possibility in the air now. And that alone is intoxicating. Today, someone finds a clutch of eggs hidden behind a broken wall. Not chicken eggs, they're too small, probably duck. It doesn't matter. Everyone gathers around it like it's a treasure chest. The eggs are divided, cooked, and shared. It's the best thing you've tasted in months. Rich, warm, and real. You lick the bowl clean when no one's looking. There's an unspoken tension hanging over everything, though. A nervous hope, because everyone knows what spring can be, but no one knows what this asterisk spring will be. The storms might return. The frost could come back and kill the shoots just as they break through the soil. And there's always the risk of a failed crop. One season off and you're right back where you started, starving and desperate. But still, people are planning. They're bartering tools, repairing fences, and rebuilding what the winter crushed. You help your neighbor patch his roof. He gives you a bone-handled knife in return. It's nothing fancy, but it's the kind of blade you can trust. You sharpen it slowly that night, the rasp of the stone on the steel soothing in its repetition. Historically, this was one of the most dangerous seasons for medieval villages. Not winter itself, but right after it. Your stores are empty, your strength is low, and nothing has grown yet. If the rains don't let up or if the seeds rot in the ground, you could still lose everything. Some historians call this period the Hunger Gap. Others just call it the dying time. But you don't think about that tonight. Not directly. Instead, you sit by the fire and you dry your socks, finally, on a stick. You make a game of it. How close can you hold them without catching them on fire? Too close. Always too close. You laugh when they start to smolder. It feels good to laugh even if your feet are still damp and your skin still itches from the rain. And outside, the frogs are singing again. That's how you really know that winter's done. The frogs always come back first. You fall asleep to the sound of them. A wet, rhythmic chorus rising from the edges of the bog, blending with the drip, drip of melting snow from the thatch above. The croft still smells like mud. Your hair is still damp. But your belly, for once, is not completely empty, and your boots are sitting by the fire drying. And somehow that's enough. The air smells different now. It hits you first thing in the morning before your eyes are even open. It's sharp, earthy, and wet, but not in the suffocating way it did during the depths of winter. This scent is alive. It's the smell of roots turning in the thawing ground, of decomposed leaves from last fall finally releasing whatever ghost of energy they had left. It's muddy, yes, but it's rich, and it's full of promise. You breathe it in and you feel your chest loosen for the first time in months. You step outside the croft and blink against the pale sunlight. Real sunlight. Not the washed-out gray glare that's dominated the sky for so long, but actual golden light. The kind that makes your skin feel something again. You pause, you turn your face toward it, and you close your eyes. This moment right here, this is what you've been crawling toward. The village looks battered and shabby, like it just survived a siege, which, in a way, it did. The crofts are streaked with soot and weather damage. The fences are sagging. The paths are all but erased under layers of churned mud and broken thatch. But there's movement. There's laughter, even. Someone's banging away at a gate hinge nearby, whistling off-key. A couple of kids are playing in the muck with sticks, pretending they're knights slaying dragons, though you can't tell which one is the dragon and which one is the knight. It doesn't matter. The fields are being turned over in earnest now. You help with it when you can. The soil is cold and heavy, reluctant to let go of its winter grip. You stab at it with a wooden spade, your shoulders aching, your hands blistering. But the more you work it, the softer it becomes. Worms are wriggling up from the depths. The crows are starting to gather, the clever things just waiting for an easy meal. The seeds go in carefully, one by one. Every placement is a prayer. You don't speak while you're planting. No one does. It's a kind of sacred silence that's been passed down through generations. Talking over the seeds is bad luck, someone once told you. Though no one remembers why, you do it anyway, just in case. You're planting barley today, saving the oats for next week. The barley is a gamble. It grows faster, but it also spoils quicker. Still, it's food, and food is all that matters. There's not much seed left, though. If this crop fails, there is no second chance. You press each seed into the damp earth with your thumb, and you whisper under your breath. Not words, just sounds. Something to fill the silence with something other than fear. Nearby, someone finds the bones of something. A sheep, maybe, or a deer. It's hard to tell anymore. They're picked clean white against the black soil. They carry it off without saying a word. There's a low hum of hope in the village now, but it's fragile. No one has forgotten what the last few months were like. The frostbitten toes, the hollow bellies, the silences at dinner. But there's a sense of motion now. That's the difference. In the winter, everything felt stuck, like the world had closed in and left you out in the cold. Now, it's like someone has opened a window. Still, the danger lingers. One bad frost could ruin everything. A cold snap in early spring has stolen an entire harvest before. You remember the story of the year the ice returned in April, so cruel and sudden that the birds froze in mid-flight. It's probably an exaggeration, but no one laughs when it's told. Just in case it's not. There's also illness, a different kind than before. Now that people are mingling again out in the damp, breathing the same air in close quarters, the coughs have returned. But these ones sound wet and deep. You can hear them echoing across the village in the evenings, guttural, hacking things that go on for too long. A boy down the hill has gone pale and thin. Some say it's just the season shifting. Others just look away. Scholars today would probably call it tuberculosis or maybe pneumonia, but here you just call it the breath sickness, and you keep your distance. Still, there is celebration, quiet ones. A woman gives birth and the baby survives. That's something. A dog that went missing in November returns, matted and thin, but wagging its tail like it just went on a holiday. Someone finds a cache of smoked fish hidden behind a collapsed wall, forgotten during the chaos of early winter. That night, everyone eats until their stomachs ache. It's the first time you felt full in so long, it almost makes you dizzy. Here's a fringe fact for you. There were medieval beliefs about eating too quickly after starvation, that it could kill you. Some said you had to coax the stomach back to life slowly, like waking a sleeping bear. That night, you ignore all that and you gorge on fish until your belt threatens mutiny. No regrets. Later, you and a few others build a scarecrow. Not because the birds are a threat yet, but because it's tradition. You stuff it with straw, dress it in an old tunic, and you tie a crude face on it with bits of charcoal and string. It leans like a drunk in the wind, one arm higher than the other, its head askew, but it's charming, familiar, a symbol that things can be planted, that the cycle is turning again. There's a quiet debate among the elders about whether to hold the spring festival this year. It's usually a modest affair, some dancing, a bonfire, maybe a song or two. Last year no one bothered, but this year, maybe, just maybe. The evening is cool, but it's not painful. You sit by the fire, your back sore, your hands filthy, your hair thick with ash and soil. You're sipping from a cup of weak ale, more water than anything, but it's warm. Your toes are dry for once. Your fingers are not shaking. You stare into the fire and you watch the sparks rise up into the dark. Someone beside you is humming. A child is asleep in someone's lap. Somewhere off in the fields, an owl hoots once, soft and low. You're not comfortable, you're not safe, but for the first time in months, you're not afraid, and that feels like a miracle. The fire's burning high tonight, but not for heat. It's for celebration. A real celebration this time. Not the grim kind with hollow eyes and forced smiles, but something true. The whole village is out. Every croft, every family, even the old ones who haven't stood upright in weeks, are all bundled in cloaks and leaning on canes, gathered near the great bonfire in the center of the green. You can barely feel your toes, but you don't care. Your face is warm. Your belly has food in it. There's music, laughter, and dancing. It's the spring feast, or at least your version of it. There's no exact date for this. No royal proclamation, no church-approved schedule. The village just waits until the air feels right, until the snow is truly gone, and until enough people agree that, yes, it's time. And now, finally, after months of cold and mud and scraping by on bark and broth, you've made it. Somehow. Somehow you're here. There's bread. Real bread. It's coarse, smoky, and flat, but it's still bread. You hold your peace with both hands like it might just vanish. You tear into it, letting the crumbs fall into your lap, chewing slowly, reverently. You can taste the ash from the old oven, the faint tang of sour barley and something else, maybe wild garlic or nettle mixed in. It tastes like work and victory. Children are running through the gathering, their laughter shrill and wild. Their cheeks are flushed, not with a fever this time, but with running and spinning and the kind of giddy exhaustion that only comes from chasing each other in circles around the fire. You hear someone shout about a game of stones starting near the old fence. You think about joining. Then you decide to just sit here a bit longer, to watch, to breathe. A fiddler is scraping out a tune that's barely holding itself together, and a few of the villagers are dancing. Not beautifully, but more like they're stomping the memories of winter into the earth. You recognize the song, though you don't know the name. It's one of those melodies that's been around forever, passed from mouth to ear, from toe to footstep, stretching back to gods that no one remembers anymore. The kind of tune that has dirt under its fingernails. You glance around and you take stock. Who's here? Who's not? There are empty places, of course. People you lost during the cold months. One man, the baker's brother, just slipped away in the night. a girl who fell sick after the melt started, and others who just disappeared into the woods or simply didn't wake up one morning. No one makes speeches about them tonight, but you can see their names in people's faces, their absence in the gaps between the chairs. Someone sets a piece of bread on an empty stool. Someone else ties a ribbon to the standing tree. There's an old tradition tied to this night. One of the elders tells it again as the fire burns down low. If you eat bread under the first full moon of spring, you invite luck into your home. You don't believe in luck, not really, but you eat the bread anyway, slowly, thoughtfully, letting every single crumb matter. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some Highlanders believed that bread made from the first flower of the season held protective powers. Not magical exactly, but symbolic. A way of anchoring yourself to the turning of the seasons. A way of saying, I made it through. You don't know if it protects anything, but it feels sacred all the same. Later, someone sings. Not a loud song, not a drinking song, but a slow one. A lament almost, though it carries something hopeful in the final notes. You know the words, everyone does. You've heard it since you were little. A song about winter's passing, about the dead being remembered and the living being grateful. It's sung in Gaelic. And even if you don't know every line anymore, the tune settles deep in your bones like a lullaby. You sing along quietly, just under your breath. As the fire burns lower, the stars come out. Faint at first, then bold. A few people lie back in the grass, just staring up at them like they've never seen stars before. It almost feels like that. You'd forgotten how vast the sky is when it isn't hidden behind clouds and snow. You spot the familiar constellations, the hunter, the dog, the mother and child. Some people start to drift back to their crofts, tired but full. Others stay by the embers, sharing stories, passing a skin of something strong around in a quiet circle. You sit between both groups, unsure which one you want more sleep or more of this night. There's a scholarly theory that these seasonal celebrations served as social reset buttons in small communities. That after long periods of isolation, grief, and near starvation, people needed a formal excuse to feel joy again. Otherwise, the guilt of having survived might be too heavy. You believe it. Without this night, this fire, this bread, this shared breath, you don't know how you'd carry what came before. Before you leave, you walk past the old standing stone, the one where people placed their offerings weeks ago when the thaw first began. It's dark now, half covered in moss. You place your fingers on it for just a moment, like pressing your hand to someone's shoulder in thanks. Then you move on. You sleep warm that night, not just from the fire or the full stomach, but from the quiet knowledge that the worst part is over. For now, anyway. There will be more winters, more hard seasons. That's the way of things. But this one didn't beat you. And in the morning, the sun will rise, and you'll plant, and you'll mend, and you'll build. Because the cold always comes back. But so does the fire. It's raining again, but now the rain doesn't bite. It's soft and warm, even if you stand in it for long enough. It slides down your cheeks like a gentle scolding and leaves the croft roof dripping in steady rhythms that somehow feel more like music than misery. You don't reach for your cloak this time. You just step outside and you let it soak you. You tilt your face toward the clouds, close your eyes, and take a long breath. There's life everywhere now. The mud is finally firming up into something like ground. The trees have burst into new greens, young, bright, and eager. The kind of color that only appears after a long, hard freeze. The fields are whispering with new shoots of barley and oat. You can almost hear them growing if you listen hard enough. Or maybe that's just your own heart thudding, unsure of how to react to a hope that doesn't come with a warning label. Your hands are rougher than they were at the start of winter. The skin has split and healed again, until calluses have taken over. Your nails are dark with soil. Your shoulders ache in a way that feels permanent, but you're still here, still moving, still planting. And the village, it's alive again, fully, properly alive. The laughter doesn't sound nervous now. The kids are screaming at full volume without the adults shushing them. The old man with the missing ear has started carving again, and the woman who lost her voice for months from the cold sang a tune yesterday while she was washing clothes. The crofts are being repaired. New fences are going up. Someone's even building a beehive from coiled straw. You can hear the buzz when you pass by it, faint, soft, and persistent. One of your neighbors got married last week. There was no fancy ceremony, just a circle of people, a shared cup, and a promise that was muttered under their breath. They danced afterward, not well but honestly. You joined in for a song or two, then you stepped back and just watched the others. It felt like something ancient waking up in your chest. At night, the hearth still burns, but not with desperation now, just with comfort. You sit with your back against the wall, your legs stretched out, a hunk of cheese and a scrap of bread in your lap. Your cloak, dry and patched, is draped across your shoulders like an old friend. You've had it for years. You hated it in January. You'd burn it tomorrow if spring offered you a new one. But tonight, it's enough. You think back over the winter, not just the cold, but the days that blurred together. The nights when you counted the drips from the ceiling or stared at the door, listening for things that might never come. The hunger, the howling, the silence. It all feels so far away now, like something that happened to someone else, or like a bad dream that you tell yourself wasn't really that bad, even when it was. And yet it was. You carry it with you. Everyone does. It changes the way you walk, the way you look at the sky, the way you hold your spoon when food is scarce. It makes you slower to trust and quicker to thank. It teaches you that survival isn't always loud or heroic. Sometimes it's just waking up and tying your boots again. There's a debate that's still ongoing, always ongoing, about whether medieval peasants were more resilient than modern people. Whether the constant proximity to death, discomfort, and hardship made them tougher or simply just numbed them. You're not sure. All you know is that in the dead of winter, when everything froze and no one was sure if they'd see the thaw, you kept going. And so did they. Tonight, you lie down on your mat with no fire. You don't need it. The air is warm. The roof doesn't leak. A bird is singing outside the window, and for the first time in months, you don't flinch at the sound of wings. And before your eyes close, you whisper something into the dark. Not a prayer, not a fear, just a thank you. So there you have it. One long, wet, frozen, muddy, and miserable Scottish winter. From your sore, blistered feet to your cracked, wind-burned lips, you made it. You survived it barely, and maybe you even came out of it with a few calluses and some stories worth retelling or suppressing entirely. Life in medieval Scotland wasn't about grandeur or glory. It was about endurance, and winter tested that endurance harder than anything else. It stripped life down to its rawest elements: cold, hunger, silence, and it demanded that you keep going anyway. No central heating, no store-bought soup, no weather alerts. Just instinct, grit, and a fire that needed feeding. But look at you now. Sitting there, warm under your covers, hopefully with something soft playing in the background and not a single wolf pawing at your door. Luxury. As you drift off tonight, think of the quiet strength of those villagers. Their hands in the dirt, their shoulders in the wind, their eyes on the sky, measuring the clouds like fortune tellers. Think about what it means to keep going when the world gives you nothing but darkness and ice. And remember that even the longest winters, the ones that feel like they'll never let go, eventually do. So rest easy. You're through the worst of it. And tomorrow the ground will be a little softer, the sun a little higher, and maybe, just maybe, you'll hear birdsong before breakfast. Sleep well, brave survivor of the Scottish winter.